We were called to order at 5:32. We went into closed session, and now we are in open. A report from open, please.
Yes,
For
in
closed,
regards
excuse
to personnel, in closed session, the board took action to approve the resignation of employee number 734 on a motion by trustee Gracia, second by trustee Water. The roll call was as followed. The vote was unanimous, and that's all reportable items.
Thank you. our flag salute. If we can have our student of the month, please lead us. This meeting is recorded for live streaming and archiving on the district YouTube channel. Approval of the agenda.
I'll move.
First by Mr. Gracia and a second by Mrs. Waters. All those in favor?
Aye.
Recognition of visitors and employee organizations? No one? Thank you very much. We'll go right into recognition of Student of the Month, and we will start with Napa Valley Adult Education.
Good evening, everybody. Board, Superintendent, Adult Ed. The green light's on. Maybe it just needs to be volumed up. It's working, but it doesn't have a lot of volume, apparently. We'll lean in. So, each of these nights are always really fabulous to hear these stories, but tonight in Adult Ed, we get to bring you sort of the full spectrum of what we do. The first student that we'll introduce that's with us tonight, Gloria Barranco, is really a success story that was on a slow, steady pace to happen. After dropping out of high school in the 10th grade and a long span of hard work and children, she returned to school, and I'll let her tell you a little bit more about her story. But what you may not get to feel is sort of this infectious attitude that she brings in terms of serving as a role model, not only to her children, but to other young Latinas in the community that want to be successful and are struggling to kind of put one foot in front of the other. So without further ado, I will let her tell her story, and you can revel in just what a fabulous young lady she is.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Gloria Barranco, and I graduated from Napa Adult Education about a month ago. First of all, I want to thank Ms. Tyler, Mr. Scott, he's right there, my family, and the Napa Valley Adult Education, who motivate me to focus and help me obtain my high school diploma. Now that I have obtained my high school diploma, I am looking forward to become an RN, as this is something that I have been interested since I was very young. This career will help me to care for my children and help others as well. When I was at Napa Valley Adult School, it was great when I found out they offered childcare, because my husband was working a second shift and we live in Sonoma, and I don't have family in Sonoma who could help me to take care of my 3 kids while I was attending to school. I called the Napa Valley Adult School and I scheduled an orientation, and the next evening I brought my 3 children with me to school, and there was nothing that could stop me from stop me from what I wanted to achieve. Being a mother of 4 children is an obstacle that I needed to overcome to be successful in completing my diploma. Ms. Tyler's words of encouragement helped me stay motivated and continue. Finally, I want to tell you that the town of Oaxaca where I grew up, is the poorest state in all of Mexico, and the people there believe that their people are not smart enough to become somebody. And I am proof that they are wrong. Former President Obama DACA programs has motivated students like me to further their education. Thank you all for giving me the opportunity to accomplish this step and continue with my education. Thank you.
Very good speaker.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Take a picture. Yes.
From no English as a 12-year-old to now in the process of entering the program at Napa Valley College to become an RN, it's pretty spectacular. What a joy it is for us to have students like that. Next, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Sanchez. So Mr. Sanchez is going to be introduced by a couple of his teachers, but this is literally the other end of our spectrum. Everyone calls him Mr. Sanchez, and I'm like, well, why do they call him Mr. Sanchez? Because he's this fabulous, fabulous older gentleman who deserves our respect, and when you hear his story, it is equally motivating and inspiring, and the relationship that he's built with his teachers over the years is really a symbol of what can happen in the adult education programs. So,
thank you very much. Good evening, school board members and guests. I am an ESL teacher for Napa Valley Adult Education, and my name is Yvonne Martin. I have the very great pleasure of introducing one of my students, Mr. Jose Sanchez, who happens to be one of my students in the multilingual program of English as a second language at Napa Library. With the cooperation of the literacy program, I'd also like to thank them for their cooperation in hosting our classes at the Napa Library. I thought that maybe Mr. Sanchez's family and friends would be here, and he told me that he is here by himself, but I'm sure that they are thrilled and support him in his educational goals. So please, and there is also another teacher here who also is one of Mr. Sanchez's teachers. So please, please join me as well as Darlene and Mr. Jordan and Mr. Sanchez in welcoming him to this very special time for him. Thank you very much. And so Darlene, I think Darlene will be next. Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Darlene Dwyer. I'm an ESL teacher at the Napa Valley Adult School, and I had the pleasure and honor of having Mr. Sanchez in my class. And what I'd like to say is that perseverance, patience, and practice are all skills needed in learning a new language. Mr. Sanchez has displayed these skills in my classroom, and his success is the result of his exceptional skills and determination. Thank you all for having us and honoring him this evening.
Good evening. My name is Jose Sanchez. I have studied English at the adult school for the past 3 years. I studied English in the mornings, but now I study in the afternoons, evening, and on Fridays. My goal is to write, read, understand English well. English is very important in my daily life. My daily life. This class helped me with my medical appointment. Before this class, communication was difficult. Adult school is good education program with great teacher, tutor, support, and lesson that help my needs. I had made many friends in my class too. Many don't know of the educational opportunity for senior students here. At the adult school, I would like for everyone to know about this wonderful opportunity. My goal is to continue progressing. I am 72, and many people ask me why they study. I tell them it's never too late to learn. Humans learn from the moment we are born until the day we die. Every day is the opportunity to learn. Thank you for this recognition.
So thank you for this wonderful opportunity and to bring the range of students that we serve. The district really serves this community well, and I think that these students that we get to bring from adult ed really show that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Valley Oak High School.
Good evening. It's always great to be in front of all of you and bringing to you some of our stellar students. This evening you'll get to hear from Salvador, who's from Valley Oak High School, Napa, and then Jasmine, who's representing American Canyon Valley Oak. So they'll come up and share a little bit. But, you know, one of the things that we always strive at the high schools I've shared before is to try to give them real life experiences. Is what does that feel like? So I want to thank Isela for coming out yesterday to see what the kids were doing with the Bite of Reality, is giving them a little bit of practice of what adulting is all about and trying to figure out how to use our budgets, and, you know, you can go into those dealerships and them telling you have to buy the car, and a student did buy a boat. But then quickly realized that he had to get rid of the child for him to keep the boat. So it's always a little bit of everything, right? And so again, in terms of our students, you know, Salvador is here tonight. We're doing a lot of work at Valley Oak to help our students really start to discover themselves again academically, to start looking towards their future in terms of what they want to do, but most importantly, giving them the confidence that they're able to accomplish whatever they set to do. And Salvador is not any different than that. He's joined us from out of district. He came over to Valley Oak High School, has really worked hard at getting his grades up and trying to to, he's a senior trying to figure out in terms of what his next steps will be. Teachers speak very highly of him in terms of being a focused young man, someone that's really bought into what we have to offer. But more importantly is he's growing into an amazing young man that has a bright future ahead of him, and I know that he will do well. So I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about himself and what his plans are, and then we'll introduce Joanne Clark, who will be introducing our second student.
I'd like to thank the school board and the Education Foundation for having me up here today. When I first got to Valley Oak, I was really, really depressed. I didn't want to do anything. I walked around with my head down, and I didn't want to be there. But when I was talking to the teachers, I developed these relationships, and it really helped me open up to other people too, not just the teachers, but the teachers there, they really helped me a lot. One of them is behind me today, Julie. Great, positive energy, and it just makes you feel like a great person when you're around her. I don't know where I would be if I wasn't at Valley Oak. I'm so glad that Valley Oak is part of my journey in my life. That's all I can really say, really. They made me feel great. They made me feel like I have a purpose.
At this time, as you know, Valley Oak High School at American Canyon is on year 2. It's been a very successful program, being, with the captain of our 2020 Teacher of the Year, Napa County Teacher of the Year. So she's going to come up and share a little bit about Jasmine.
Good evening, everybody. Salvador, thank you for your story. Thank you. So I'm so happy to share my Jasmine grouper with you guys tonight. This is my second year with Jasmine. She came to me as a junior and has been nothing but light and love and kindness and hard work and determination since the day she walked through the door. And she, is the reason why I do what I do, because she makes me want to be better and pushes me to be better. She's that little soft word in my ear, be saying, be more patient with us. I'm like, more patient. But she's that voice, and so she's my teammate in this process. And so she went from being credit deficient to being on track to graduate early, and I'm super proud, and she's going to be on track, because we're going to be on track. And so she's here with her family and her loving boyfriend, and they're just so great. And Christian Lopez, another one of our students, is here as well. So I'm going to let Jasmine talk, because I can go on all day. Because you're just my girl.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hello, my name is Jasmine Gruber. It is an honor to be here today. I first want to start off by thanking the school board for providing the tools necessary for my education to my fellow classmates and I. Thank you. What a journey it has been for me during my 3.5 years at American Canyon High School. My downfall started in my sophomore year when I began to struggle keeping up in class, staying focused, and turning assignments in. I then heard about Valley Oak at American Canyon High School from my counselor, Mr. De Mesa. Valley Oak is for the selected few that are far behind in credits for graduation requirements. Now, I begin to thrive and have self-determination to have a successful future for myself. And I couldn't have done it without the support from my loved ones, and I especially want to thank Miss Clark for changing my life around. She has made a strong impact in my life and is an absolute inspiration, not only to me, but everyone who steps foot in our class. I'm thankful to have the opportunity to recover credits, and I'm proud of myself for working hard to graduate and doing my best to balance work and school. Now my goals are to go to college for a business degree and make my dreams come true. Thank you.
Can I have all of the students and staff come up for a picture, please? Okay, so we're going to make a couple of changes from our agenda. So what we're going to do is we're going to move up a couple of items. So we will move right after public comment, presentation, actually after public comment, we'll go right into H2A, and then we will also move J right behind H2A, J1. And lastly, the last change, Mr. Jason Hutchings I don't want you to wait till the very end of the meeting, so I'll have you come up with G into open comments, if you don't mind, okay? All right. So public comments, members of the audience may address the board on any school-related matters that are not on the agenda. The board will not take action on any issue raised during this section of the agenda. Inasmuch as board action is limited to posted agenda items, speakers are requested to limit their comments to a maximum of 3 minutes. And just as a reminder that when the alarm sounds off, your time is up. Thank you very much. First, Kirsty Shelton. Kirsty.
public comment card? Did you fill out a card?
I don't have a public comment card, I'm sorry.
I didn't know I had to sign one.
There's some on the back table. If you just fill it out and hand it to Vera Morales here.
do that
Yes, please. Kirsty? Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kirsty Shelton. I'm a principal at the Palisades Land Use here in Napa, 101 South Coombs. I spoke at a few of the hearings up till now, and I'm here to enter into the administrative record and reiterate 3 important components before you. First of all, I want to reiterate that if you proceed with the action without doing the California Environmental Quality Act, you are subject to a legal argument. The first item is projections of new students are not accurate and drastically underrepresented. And it is vital to consider the development occurring with the city boundary and vicinity when determining the future of schools. The recent City of Napa General Plan update shows that in December of 2018, there were 63 major development projects either approved, under construction, or under review in Napa. It should be noted that none of these were included in your current and planned residential development graphic and information presented to the committee. These projects will develop about 1,700 housing units, 591 of them affordable, including Napa Pipe, an additional 945 units, which totals 2,645 new housing units, which is more than double the demographic's calculation of 1,026. I urge that the board analyzes an appropriate higher projection of new students, potentially 790, rather than the previous 300 new students. The second item is the capacity of the new schools, if they are being consolidated, has not been disclosed. The capacity of the receiving schools has not been disclosed, and therefore there is no way of knowing if they have the capacity and in what environmental impacts may result of the consolidation, such as construction of classrooms, assessment of parking and traffic. Third, and the most important aspect, is you are vulnerable to a CEQA challenge. The action whether to close a school, consolidate schools, or relocate a school is a project, as defined by the California Environmental Quality Act. It is not uncommon for school districts to function under the assumption that they do not require as a discretionary action. However, CEQA requires the lead agency, in this situation, the Napa Valley Unified School District and the board, to disclose all impacts associated with the project. That includes additional classrooms and to disclose all aspects of the project, which includes the intention of potential surplus land, relocation of schools, and to look at reasonable alternatives. So far, I have not seen any of this, compliance of CEQA or alternatives. The district and the board needs to have reliable data on the current capacity of receiving schools, accurate demographic data, and potential new students, and analyze reasonable and foreseeable environmental impacts. This information was provided, and I can be happy to provide additional information if you need it. Thank you.
Lisa Gisletta.
Good evening. Tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about a collaboration between Napa High School and Vintage High School. For the first time ever, Vintage and Napa High School athletic boosters are joining efforts to raise money for athletic programs. As many of you know, there have been many district cuts, and a lot of the funding for the athletic programs completely comes from the booster programs. You may have seen banners around town. Some of the things that funds the athletic boosters pays for is assistant coaches, uniforms, the coach's cloth, tournament fees, equipment, balls, dirt, fertilizer, some facility upgrades, and more. Booster clubs, to include choir, band, and athletics, rely mainly on fundraising to continue our programs. I want to thank Hanley's of Napa for their generous donation to support our schools. BP Printing and Graphics, Darla Aaron, Napa Valley Marketplace, KVON, and their staff for their continuous support, and of course, our business community that is supporting our athletes by hosting site locations to sell the tickets, and for our community members who are purchasing the tickets. Katie Aaron, Jennifer Matern, Debbie Puffer, Lotta Koska, for your strengths to work together for the good of all of our student athletes. The coaches and the programs at both Napa and Vintage High School. I'm proud to be part of this team. However, I'm not sure I'll ever be comfortable with doing the live radio shows. So, it's been a little tough for me. Makes me a little nervous every time. The coordination and the collaboration between the schools and the groups has been just a really positive experience. A thank you to both the cheer teams, both bands for sharing the halftime with the boosters. Believe me, every 30 seconds matters at halftime. The coordination has been ongoing. A huge appreciation for Monica Reddy, Sarah O'Connor, and of course our ADs, Cam Neal and Darcy Ward, for their support. The efforts from our team reps is crucial, and we appreciate all that these parents do and volunteer. To Mark Ibanez for supporting and announcing the winner for us at the big game. And a special thank you to the district employees, Jeff Aguirre and Pedro Lara, for working with Katie and I, facilitating bringing the car in and out of the stadium and making sure we make it back to our car safely at the end of the night. In closing, I ask, if you have not purchased tickets for your chance to win a car and support our athletes, now is the time. The drawing is on November 1st at the big game at halftime. Reach out to a student athlete or let me know and I'll send one selling tickets in your direction. Please remember that all of our programs need your support: athletics, band boosters, and choir boosters. Thank you.
Randy Gallardi.
Randy Gallardi, 780 Trancas Street. I'm sorry for the understanding of how to present. Anyway, school board, I just wanted to say that I've lived in Napa for over 60 years. My father-in-law, 80 years ago, went to Mount George School. My children went to Mount George School. I'm a business owner. I was a co-chair of the school bond and have represented in the past as your realtor the school district on the purchasing and selling of their school properties. I have some thoughts to share with you. I come from a business mind, not an emotional mind. Cindy Water knows that. I believe Yountville School should be closed, but first offered to St. Helena School District and see if they're willing to purchase it or lease it from the Unified School District. Then it should be sold if they are not. Yountville is not a pro-growth community and thus will not need a school in that area for a long time. I believe West Park, Alta Heights should be spared. They are in areas that can absorb additional growth. As for Mount George, I believe Stonebridge out in Los Caneras should be moved to Mount George School, thus saving Mount George from being sold. Then you sell Stonebridge to the wine industry for farm worker housing. They need a location out in that area. You have a perfect site with a large septic system, great well, and structures that can be converted to housing. Then you take the proceeds of Stonebridge, Yountville, and the sale of Vintage Farm, which is about $20 to $25 million, and you have choices. I have two of them. One is, which I think is the most important, you build housing units for your employees, staff, or teachers on the existing school properties that has surplus land on it, such as the new elementary school in American Canyon, or Vintage High School at the corner of Trower and Jefferson. There may be about 2 acres there. You build on this land, rent them out to your employees, and thus generate a cash flow that can go into your general operating budget. Or, and by the way, I can assist you at no charge, I make that very clear. I do this all the time as far as development in the city of Napa. I know how to develop properties. So I would be willing to assist at no charge to shepherd the projects through for you, okay? Also, the other idea is, as good stewards of your money, pay down the existing school bonds, thus creating less property taxes for the general public to pay out, and thus in the future, when there's a need for a school bond, you have shown that you have made good financial decisions. You have difficult decisions, but these decisions are business decisions and should not be made by your emotional side. Your decisions now will affect for years the financial security of this district. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Jason Hutchings.
Vice President Martin, trustees, Dr. Massetti, staff, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I just wanted to take a moment and let you know how divisive this 7-Eleven process has been on this community. I've sat through, I've had the privilege of sitting through these 7-Eleven hearings, and I've seen the effect at the ground level. I'm a resident of Yountville, and my son is a first grader at Yountville. And from a micro community standpoint, it's been devastating to us, and I'm sure likewise to the Mount George community. So there's that effect. Also, I think county-wide there's been an effect. I think you've ostracized our communities, and you've divided the district communities up. And to me, it seems contradictory to one of the goals set out, and I believe it's the LCPA that the district has put out. So I just wanted to comment on that. I'm not a realtor. I'm not necessarily speaking from a business standpoint. I'm speaking from a community member standpoint. And I don't think it's right what's going on. And I believe that you've hired the staff you've hired to do some hard work. And I don't think closing schools is easy, but from my perspective, it looks as though maybe that's the easiest thing to do at this point. I just ask that you guys hold your staff to task and make them do the hard work that they need to do to keep this community intact and not take the easy way out. So I appreciate your time and your consideration. Thank you.
Jason, I have your card for the M.
I can speak then.
That's fine. Okay. Okay, and that's all the cards I have. The other cards will go for the, I want to say, after our report on, excuse me, on J, sorry. Okay, J, H2A.
Good evening, Vice President Martin, NVUSD Board of Education trustees, Dr. Massetti, and community members. We are here tonight to honor Mr. Marty James. Marty, can I have you come on up here with me, please? For those of you who don't know Marty, Marty has been a reporter with the Napa Valley Register for at least 40 years. Is that correct? Correct, good. I got that right for once. And he's been covering high school athletics for 40 years. This is an anomaly. You normally do not have someone who covers high school athletics in the same town or the same valley or the same county for 40 years. And it's been an amazing ride to have Marty being a reporter for high school athletics. He's reported on some of the most legendary sporting contests in the Napa Valley that have happened here, and I think he's enjoyed every minute of those. I know I've enjoyed some of those too. He's also been instrumental in highlighting and acknowledging athletic participation at every single sport. So it's not just about football or basketball, but He's in there with the badminton, and he's in there with the other sports, the water polos and things like that. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Marty, and I got this from a couple people actually in the audience who are former coaches as well, Marianne Christopherson and Barb Franco, who has covered their sports. Marty's unbiased in his reporting about athletic programs at Napa High, Vintage High, and later at American Canyon. He's always a balanced reporter and balanced reporting in his stories. You never knew what high school was his favorite. We know it was Vintage. Kidding. He did a super job showcasing student athletes at each high school. He was prepared, good questions during the interviews. He kept the community informed of former high school student athletes playing at the college level, which is always nice to see, and it's in the paper today as I speak. He was professional at all times, excellent sports reporting, and he really knew his sports. He knew things about the sports that many sports reporters don't always know. He was invisible at games, and his presence was invisible, and I don't mean that literally like invisible, but you didn't know he was there reporting. He didn't get himself too much in the way of the game and things like that, which was really nice to see. For us in Napa, Marty reported on all the big games, be it football, volleyball, basketball, baseball. He reached for the paper the next day. We all reached for the paper the next day to read his articles, which were always spot on. He was a true professional in every way, and when you talk of high school athletics, Marty James' name is sure to come up. He's reported on so many big stories, countless student athletes, and even in retirement continues to share his writing with the community. He's become an accomplished golfer and now has a bit more time to perfect a game that is impossible to perfect. And then finally, I'd like to say, and I think I speak on the behalf of Marianne and Barb and many of the other coaches out there, that you can't always say this about a reporter, but Marty's a friend. And that's a true compliment to any reporter in the news industry when you know that they can be counted on as a friend. So we also want to take a moment here to acknowledge his wife, Karen, who's in the audience. Karen. Karen, even though we're here honoring Marty tonight for the 40 years of service in the county of Napa, we also want to thank you for allowing him to cover those countless nights being out and about. There were many deadlines that Marty was making late into the night, and I know Karen was wondering where was her husband Marty. So thank you, Karen, for that. Anyways, so please join me in a round applause for Marty James, 40 years of service of reporting. Marty, you want to say a few words?
I'd love to.
Yes.
I'll make it really quick. Thank you very much, Mike, Dr. Musetti, the Board of Education, Robin. I feel like I hit the jackpot when I came to Napa back in '79. I was not from this area. I didn't know much about the community, the schools, the principals, the student athletes, the parents, the families, the people who read this great newspaper. And I absolutely fell in love with this town. And 40 years later, I made a tough decision to step away from something I truly loved. I'm so proud of the people who put this paper out each day. Howard Yoon is here tonight. Howard and I worked together for many, many years. It was a very emotional decision to step away, but I couldn't have done this without the support of my wife, Karen, in the audience here. Mike was right. You know, I was somewhere other than at home, but I loved doing what I did. I felt an obligation, a responsibility to, contribute in some form, fashion, whether it was a story, a column, a feature. I think the community relies on this great newspaper to inform our community what is happening each and every day, and Napa is very lucky to have a newspaper like this. I just want to end by saying that I'll always be very grateful to Rich Heinz and Nick Nash who took a chance on a 21-year-old rookie journalist just out of college. I graduated, and 2 weeks later, I got a job at a daily newspaper. I mean, that doesn't happen, and I felt very, very honored and lucky. I'm very proud of all the work that I put into this over 40 years. I became invested in this community. I loved it. I wanted to know who the student athletes were, the coaches, the administrators, the parents, the people who read our paper, what they think about how we're doing our job. And I would like to also let you know that this is a world-class community. And what I was able to work those 40 years around was something I truly loved. I loved every minute of it. And I want to thank again Dr. Musetti and the board for this I'm very humbled and honored to be receiving this tonight. And if I can be of any help to you, the Board of Education, this school district, I'm just a phone call away. But thank you so very, very much.
Karen, can we have you come up for a photo with Marty? Okay. We'll go into J, presentation and discussion items. J1A. Presentation of 7-Eleven District Advisory Committee report on recommendations regarding small school closures and consolidations.
Thank you, Vice President Martin, members of the board, Dr. Musetti, and members of the community. We are here to give you a report on our 7-Eleven committee. You want to go to the next slide? I don't have a clicker. So as you have heard over the course of several meetings, as well as of course these over these meetings, NVUSD has been facing significant budget issues for several years now. Our structural deficit coupled with this declining enrollment is propelling the district to have to make significant cuts in areas in order to avoid fiscal insolvency. In addition to already taking action on several cost-saving initiatives that have been outlined at previous board meetings, the NVUSD leadership put into motion the 7-Eleven committee designed to formalize a process for considering the small school closures, which was one of the recommended cost-cutting measures recommended by the county Office of Education, Napa County Office of Education, if I think you remember correctly. This 7-Eleven committee, comprised of community members and governed under the Brown Act rules, was tasked with helping the district make appropriate decisions regarding school closure. Travis, you go to the next slide, please. So these actions have been grounded in our strategic plan. As stated in Goal 4 of our NVUSD strategic plan, the district must maximize effective and sensible facilities management based upon measurable economic realities. Through numerous inputs such as declining enrollment, budget deficits, and recommendations from the Napa County Office of Education, the Napa Valley Unified School District Board and the district administration began to evaluate the feasibility of operating small schools in the current budget environment that we are faced right now. Next slide, Travis. Therefore, we formed, as one of the action items outlined by the County Office of Education, we formed a 7-Eleven committee. This committee in August of 2019, the Board of Trustees conveyed that the 7-Eleven committee as a volunteer advisory group to make a recommendation on potential small school closures and or consolidation and possible uses for the property if schools are closed. Committee members and alternates met the requirements stated in the California Education Code, and the committee met 4 times during August through October and allowed for public comment at all the meetings. The Brown Act procedures, as stated in the slide, were followed at all of these meetings. Next slide, please. The process was this: that each committee member was provided background information at the first meeting. A committee chair and a vice chair were elected by the committee. Agendas and resource materials for each meetings were posted on our NVUSD District 711 website, which is in accordance with the Brown Act. And the district staff consolidated all questions raised throughout public comment, as well as at the committees and at meetings and emails that we received in subsequent communications, and provided the information to address concerns via our website and the response to inquiries page. So that was our process. I'm now going to call up the chair of the 711 committee, Mrs. Barbara Franco, to continue with the presentation of what the process had after the chair and the vice chair were elected by the committee. And in addition, I'm also calling up Vice Chair Eric Housley to also be part of this presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here this evening. To say that this was an easy process for the 711 committee to go through would be a false statement. We knew from the beginning how difficult the work that we had ahead of us. Dr. Musetti and her staff kept us focused, and the words that really resonated with me as we began our first meeting was how important it was for us to listen and how important it was for us to learn and be open to asking questions, which is hard sometimes in a public forum, which you folks know, but mostly to listen to the community. And we did that. And I believe that the feedback from the community, both at the site meetings that were held, there was a informational meeting held at Mount George and a meeting held at Yountville. I believe that being able to listen to the community members in those 2 schools, for me, and additionally listen to those people as they spoke passionately about their schools and passionately about their community. I think all of us that have had children that have gone through Napa Valley Unified would speak passionately about the school our children went to. But the community engagement helped us shape our recommendation and helped us be able to write the report that Eric and I will be presenting with you this evening. At the first meeting, Mike, could you go to this next slide? The first meeting for us was a lot of procedural items in terms of us learning what our role and responsibility was going to be, particularly that we were an advisory committee. Our task was not to make a decision, it was to make to advise the board, and that's what we will be doing tonight. We learned quickly about the Brown Act. I've been to a lot of meetings, obviously school board meetings and so on. I've never actually had to run a Brown Act meeting, and that was a really high learning curve for me. But people were patient with me in learning how to do that. Dr. Musetti and her staff presented us with information at each meeting, and though at sometimes during these meetings it was overwhelming, it really, as I said in the beginning, helped us learn, and that was extremely important. Eric is going to talk a minute about the things in meeting 1 that were not necessarily procedural, being that was a big responsibility that I had. So, Eric.
School Board, thank you for having us. I think that was a good fit that had just happened between Barb and I, as Barb's kind of procedural, and if you've ever looked at my truck, it's not very organized. And I'm more of I'm a businessman, and so I came in with the concept of I want details, I need data. And so at meeting 1, the one thing I heard right away was the people want the data before. They want the data that they can read and look at it before, and a lot of people made that clear. We started asking the same. I then had the opportunity to start digging deeper into some of that data because we were getting presented a lot of stuff from the community that was getting very confusing to those committee members. So I started to try to dig deep into kind of the data that was, that we were getting a lot from staff as well as from the community to try to kind of sort through it and sift through to help make those decisions. So in meeting one, much of it was about data and information. In that meeting, we also heard that some of the data that was presented wasn't necessarily correct. And so that got us where we kind of gave staff some recommendations to go back out. I also asked for clarification of, I thought, I came in as a businessman, I'm like, all right, let's see the budget, let's do this. And then we realized that we were tasked to actually look at just the school closures, not the actual budget stuff. But in the process, a lot of budget questions came up, so that helped. So that was the more or less meeting one. So.
In meeting two, what we were presented with, could you go, Mike, to the next slide? Again, Dr. Musetti and her team reviewed with us and really, kept us focused around what our task was and to listen to the information presented by her team. Meeting two was a little bit overwhelming in terms of the information that was presented to us, and I certainly understand, and I think Eric and I understood how a lot of new language and a lot of new terms came forward for committee members that they had questions about, understanding more about the IB program at Mount George, understanding about AVID, understanding how important the TLC program was at West Park, clearly understanding the importance of the after-school and before-school programs at Yountville. So there were a lot of things that came forward in meeting two. Are you going to do the thing with Mike on the revisiting facilities?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Hang on just a second. So we had meeting two did not provide us as a committee any opportunity for any open discussion. It was again back to listening, learning, really paying attention to the words of the communities of those two schools. And it was, as you all know, difficult at times to hear the passion of different parents speaking about their children's schools. Eric is going to talk a minute about there was some clarifications that were needed to be made with regard to facilities. Mr. Pearson presented some information on the capacity of the facilities in our first meeting. There were some questions from the committee that came forward about some inaccuracies that were in Mr. Pearson's presentation. So you want to go?
Yep. So we asked, in meeting one, it was brought to our attention of some of the facilities, the actual uses of certain, the quantity of rooms, the quantity of people that could actually be in, like total capacities. So we asked for clarifications. Mr. Pearson came back at the second meeting and said, basically, we took all that data from old data that had been given from before, and they went back out and used it, that data based on 25 students, which is how the state does it, I believe, was how they did it, was they came back and they said, based on 25 students, here's the amount of rooms you actually could have at each of these sites, and so did some clarifying data, which helped me. I'm kind of a data junkie of that stuff. It helps me wrap my head around the concept and where it was going. So a lot of the second meeting went back into clarifications to kind of sort, again, through all the information, which then led us into meeting three.
Meeting three was a big meeting for the committee. It was the first opportunity we had as a committee to have a study session after the two meetings of being presented with data and numbers, and mostly of the first part of meeting three also involved some information presented by Mr. Mangala with regard to school boundaries. So there was again, a lot of information for us to absorb before we went into our study session. As I said, meeting 3 began to show the committee how potential new school boundaries would look for the resident students at Yountville, moving potentially into a school boundary with Willow, and the resident students of Mount George possibly moving into the Alta Heights boundaries. The district put together a consolidation plan, bringing those two schools together, showing us the boundaries. And secondly, and most importantly, were the conversations around the open enrollment process and how that was going to impact students being moved from Yountville to Willow, and students being moved from Mount George to Alta Heights. And that resulted actually in some new school board language in terms of open enrollment that you people will see in our report. And go ahead.
One quick clarification. Barb mentioned that they gave us the consolidation plan. We did not receive that in meeting 3, and that was a clarification thing that did happen in meeting 4. But this was a meeting that finally I actually asked staff, I said, can we somehow limit comment, because the committee we can't even discuss anything because there's so much emotion for good reason. I'm a Yountville school grad too. I don't want to see it happen, but we couldn't really get in and have discussion that was going to kind of fuel us and the reason why we were actually there. So we had the opportunity at this point to get some additional data. It was apparent that staff from the beginning had an idea of what they thought would happen. And I actually asked the question, like, okay, it's obviously leaning towards a direction and the community is feeling that. And then it was kind of described to me, it's kind of like a business person. When you actually go in and you have a plan and you know what you need to do and you know the data, there's obviously reason. So it was our job to either disprove them or find other ways to go. And I think the deeper we got, the more it was too difficult to disprove and I don't remember the exact wording of it, but how do you affect the least number of resident students possible? And because obviously if we have to close schools, which do we do it in the easiest fashion? And there's no easy fashion. So, how do you rip a Band-Aid off of a bullet hole, for lack of a better term in my mind? But it's one of those things that if this has to happen, how do we go? So this was a meeting that allowed us really to get into some more details, but we could feel at that point there was still some clarifying stuff, especially on the school consolidation of where the movement would happen. But at that point, there was the vote on meeting 3, right? Was the vote to actually choose that Mount George and Yountville would be closed. So the consolidation hadn't been confirmed. There was the ideas of it, but at that point, it was proposed, but it didn't go through of waiting for another meeting, adding another meeting to the process, just for more public consensus, and that got shot down. And then we made the formal vote on Mount George and Yountville. So that was the end of meeting 3.
So, yeah. So with that in place, with the recommendation from the 7-Eleven committee to close Yountville and Mount George, district staff went to work around designing and developing the consolidation action plan for 2020, which I believe is now what we're calling this process. And spoke clearly at meeting 4 around what are the staffing implications going to be in terms of faculty and certificated and classified staff, and sort of laid out that the collective bargaining agreements from both of those employee groups would govern what happens with staff, and that helped answer some questions that had come through from the community. There were a lot of questions that had come through about school programming, school culture, what was going to happen when the possibility of these schools coming together, who was going to lead that, what was that going to look like for the faculty and the parents and the children at those two schools. Marianne Vias spoke about timelines that she had put together and the actions that would go into place, potentially if there's a vote by the board on October 24th to close the schools and accept the consolidation plan. We learned about the timelines for the implementation from Dr. Mussetti's staff, which helped committee members understand and not that they all agreed, but understood that there is a plan and nothing can really start until the board takes action, that we are just, recommending to the board with our report.
Just a quick, it was not unanimous as a decision to make the recommendation. I believe it was 10-1. But you guys have that data, I would assume, for consolidation. Correct. Closure was 9-2, consolidation was 10-1. And you probably have the data of why, like the comments that people had. But that was something I just thought it should be noted. But yeah, meeting 4 was more about we saw the actual plan of who would move where and the actual wording of how it would fall into the district, as well as the open enrollment, facilitating to make sure the students that were affected by school closures got one or two rungs up on the open enrollment for 1 year while they could get placed in the process.
So before we talk about some of the recommendations, at meeting 4, we drafted the report in a public forum. I've never done that before. Trying to get people to truly talk about what do you want to have in this report. It's a little tricky when you don't have a closed door that you're working behind. But I believe that there was a tone that was set, that committee members began to feel comfortable asking questions of staff, comfortable of asking questions of each other, and really beginning to get their hands wrapped around what this consolidation 2020 plan was going to look like. We drafted the report and approved the report, and then we voted on accepting the consolidation plan, and as Eric shared, the vote was 10-1. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. There were a number of things that the committee wanted to be sure that the board was aware of in terms of things that the committee members felt very passionate about making sure you folks saw some of their thoughts. And one of the big ones, as we shared, was the issue of open enrollment and having some language change around open enrollment to embrace these children and their families, and to be able to try to keep those student groups together as they moved. So the committee did recommend the closing of Yountville and the consolidation of Yountville with Willow, as you know, and with the adjusted boundaries that were presented in the consolidation plan by Mr. Mangala. Families at those schools would still have the option of participating in open enrollment with the new language that is in our report. The same thing is true for Mount George, right? That was very important for those families to decide whether, to be able to, if they were not resident students of Mount George, that they would be able to have the option of going to Alta Heights and being able to stay there. Again, Eric and I both spoke about the open enrollment, and there was a lot of community input on open enrollment. and that was heard by the district. If you look right down the hall now, there's an open enrollment office where there's somebody there that can help families through that process. It's not an easy process, and the district has heard that, and we felt really good about that. You want to talk about the after-school programs?
Sorry for texting while my 15-year-old's home alone and was looking for dinner. So, mom tries to take the night off. What's going on? In terms of the after-school program? Yeah. So one of the things that we heard repeatedly was the after-school programs are, at certain schools, Willow are over impacted and Yountville's programs are really good. So we recommended reviewing the program to ensure that they can absorb the number of students either at Willow or possibly work with the town of Yountville to get something to allow for possibly immediate busing if we know they're going to get to Yountville, and then have the opportunity to have after-school programs there as well, because it is still a community and they've got a great program. So we wanted at least that to be recommended, to look into those two options to make sure that that could happen, because it's a pretty effective program from what we're aware of.
And lastly, well, two things before we wrap up here. The IB program at Mount George is an instructional program that will need to be looked at in terms of the work that Marianne Vias will do with the committee, with the two faculties at Mount George and Alta Heights. We've learned it's not easy to convert and just move Mount George on to the Alta Heights campus, and bingo, you know, they become an IB school. That's not how it works. So Marianne Vias shared that not only will they look at IB program, they'll look at other instructional programs to determine what is best for that new school community as that school community begins to find their identity. Transportation was also an issue for families at Yountville and Mount George, and you'll see in our report some language around the board looking at the possibility of providing transportation for the kids coming from Yountville to Willow and Mount George to Alta Heights. As we showed in the beginning, this was a complex, complicated, and not overly joyful task, but I think Eric and I and the committee members certainly feel like, because we had a process, we stayed true to that process, we learned, we listened. Listening to some of the speakers, it was really grounding to, you know, keep focused on the problem, not the person. You know, the problem was us trying to figure out what to do, and really understanding how difficult this situation was for some of the parents. Our goal, we believe, in providing you with our report, it gives you some informed recommendations in terms of stabilizing the financial situation of the school district, and I think that's the one of the overarching tasks that we were given in the wake of declining enrollment. We're in some difficult times. I think the committee did what Dr. Musetti asked us to do, and really has been something that absorbed all of us since the very first meeting that we had on August 20th. So I really want to thank you for the opportunity, Eric and I, for leading this process. The report is complete except for our decision around the surplusing of property, which has not been done, and that is spoken to in the report. We have still some work to do once the board makes a decision about what will happen on October 24th. Then the committee will reconvene so that we can handle the tasks of the surplus properties as outlined in the responsibilities that Dr. Musetti has given us, and the guidelines the state has on the surplusing of properties. And so that still is outstanding for us. So
the only thing I would say is there was some suggestion of the speed of the process. I think some people have to understand that this was not 4 meetings one of them was, I think, 4 hours. It was a long night. I literally lived it 3 hours, 4 hours a day for the start to the finish because I was trying to talk to people and ask questions and come up with ideas and really dive deeper. Because sometimes staff can have a plan and it's like we're going this direction and you just get there. So sometimes it's nice to have a set of eyes outside. And I'm the first one to say that I don't think government runs the most efficiently, and based on your past financial situations in the last 10 years, maybe that's a fair assessment. And unfortunately, you were in a situation where you guys had to make staff had to make some very tough decisions. And sadly, we find ourselves in that predicament. But I think as a whole, it was not taken lightly. I know all the other committee members that I spoke to, they were talking to people. We were all trying to come up with ideas and think of what we could. And I think it just kept going down a road that we saw the inevitable happening. So at least from what I saw. So as hard as it was to do that, or to at least make that recommendation, I think I can sleep at night knowing it was the recommendation that we felt was the right thing to do, at least 10 of us. And that's not throwing the other one under the bus by any means, it's just because it showed how difficult the decision was. So we hope that helps, and don't know if there's questions or...
Ms. Franco and Mr. Housley, thank you so much for your detailed report. Fellow trustees, the way we're going to do this is I'm going to go ahead and open it for public comment, so if you can please stick around. And then after public comment, we will open for discussion with the trustees. Thank you. Katie Molnar.
I did not plan on being first tonight. Hello, my name is Katie Molnar. I'm a Mount George mother of these 3 wonderful Mustangs over here. I'm tired, and I know you're all tired too. But I'm here tonight with my 3 students to show you that as fatigued as we are, we're not done fighting for our school. It's amazing teachers and our Mustang family. Again, I'm tired, and I'm too tired to go over the data with you. Staff has provided you with data, and parent after parent has come up here, meeting after meeting after meeting, and refuted that data. You're the decision makers. You're the end all and the bottom line. And next week in those chairs, you'll vote on the closure of Yes and Mount George. I'm here tonight to plant a seed. I want to plant a seed of serious doubt in your minds. I acknowledge the reason we're in this position. We've been told the decision needs to be made to save $1 million in the budget, but here's where I'd like to plant the seed of doubt in your mind. Will it? Will this closure truly save what Dr. Massetti and her staff have told you that it will? Let me read you a question and answer from the 7-Eleven Committee's own response to inquiries website. The question is, will the district really save the projected $1 million by closing 2 schools as it appears this has not been the case in other school districts? The answer, we cannot infer based on our other districts. The district anticipates we will save a very substantial amount of money by closing 2 schools, and it stands by its estimates. Calculations of the exact amount is a very complex process. Let me repeat that. Their answer is, calculations of the exact amount is a very complex process. Trustees, please hear me. Our Mount George International Elementary School is a tremendous value to our community. And calculating that exact amount is actually impossible. Not only do we have a facility that is well maintained and low maintenance with low operating costs, but we have a brand new $1 million septic system and new lawn that district just installed last year. We have an amazing academic program in our International and Baccalaureate program that cannot be picked up and transplanted elsewhere in the district. We have great test scores, drawing academically minded families from all over our valley. Mount George is one of the crown jewels of the district. Our value is so much more than the $500,000 savings that NVUSD staff has reduced us to. Trustees, I conclude with this thought. As you come here to vote next week, if you, both in your heart and your head, cannot see that closing Mount George will save $500,000, then you must vote to save Mount George instead. Thank you.
Dugan Molinar.
Hello, my name is Duggan Molnar, and I'm here with my two brothers, Tibor and Senner. We are Mount George Mustangs. We are talking to you tonight about the closure of Mount George Elementary School. With 24 hours in the day, after we sleep for 12 of them, 6 hours we spend at this amazing school makes up half of our day. Mount George is like our second home. We eat there, we learn there, and we grow there. Let me tell you what it is like to be a family a part of Mount George. Just last year, Stenner went to kindergarten at Mount George. It's like I got to experience kindergarten all over again. I helped him with his homework. I got to be a role model in his classroom. I even sometimes took recess and lunch to help out in the kindergarten playground. Even sometimes with my third grade brother Tibor, it is fun to see him learn the units I've learned and share the experience with him. And it will be helpful with his learning. I hope that I can experience the same experience with my 12-year-old sister, my 2-year-old sister Saoirse at Mount George too. I still remember when I went to safari night at school with my little sister, and when they brought the lynx out, her face lit up and she yelled out, "Cat!" And that was one of her first words. I think that if you close our school, many future generations will lose that awesome learning experience. I love it here at Mount George, and it made a difference in so many students and families' lives. You can't give us all these wonderful things and just take them away from me and my two brothers and all the kids at Mount George. You might be thinking that won't affect me because I'm in 5th grade, and I'm going on to middle school. But as I look ahead, leaving Mount George for middle school, I feel prepared because of that IB foundation that I have laid on my education. Thank you for the amazing teachers at Mount George. I am worried for my brothers and all the other kids at Mount George that they won't get to finish the IB foundation in their education if our school is closed. Like I said at the last meeting, if you close these schools, they will never be reopened, and that's losing a lot. Do you really want that to be what you're remembered for? We love Mount George, and please don't take it away from us. Thank you.
Candace Chia.
That's a tough act to follow. Good evening, my name is Candace Chia, and I have 2 kids at Mount George, and I'm asking you, the board, to vote next week to keep Mount George open. I'm here to share with you my son's story, which is very personal, and I usually keep it very private. But I share with you today in this open forum because keeping Mount George open is that important. Mount George is our home school, but we didn't automatically enroll there or take our decision lightly. I visited and considered 5 elementary schools in our district before choosing Mount George for my children. The decision wasn't simple because my son has special needs. Across all aspects of his life, he has thrived in smaller environments and struggled to cope and have his needs met in larger ones. Knowing that he is more successful in small settings, I chose Mount George, and I'm so thankful that it was an option in our district. Mount George has been the ideal placement for my son and for our family. Ingrained in our school culture and the IB program is the value that every person has worth and something important to contribute to our school, our community, and our world. Our kids are truly learning and practicing kindness, respect, empathy, and compassion every day. My child is living proof of this. He has special needs. Few families and not every teacher is aware of this. Regardless of whether they know or not, the kids, parents, and teachers at Mount George appreciate him for who he is, his strengths and his challenges, and everything he contributes to our school. Every teacher knows him. They are looking out for him and go beyond the call of duty to help him be successful every day. For that, I am deeply thankful to our school and every Mount George family. My son is vulnerable. He's the kid who has a hard time making friends, who's likely to be teased or bullied, the kid who struggles to fit in, who could easily be overlooked and fall through the cracks. But at Mount George, he is anything but those things, because he is seen, accepted, valued, and supported by our teachers, students, and parents. At the end of last year, he received a Learner Profile Award. This is him. This is the award. In front of the entire school for being principled, which is a core value of IB, and my kids tell me that this is the hardest award to earn during the school year because you have to be principled for the entire year. This kind of recognition is what typical parents hope for their kids, but as a special needs parent, it's something I haven't dared to dream of. But at Mount George, it is possible to dream these dreams for my son. This is what makes Mount George special and meaningful. Mount George should be valued as an asset in our district. It is not a school that should be closed. I implore you to support Mount George, to preserve it as a choice in our district for families like mine in the future, and vote against closure. Thank you.
Jen Heem? She left. Connie Brennan?
Good evening, Dr. Musetti, members of the board, and the NVUSD community. I'm here tonight for many reasons, too many reasons to state in 3 minutes, and they are like an onion. Every time I come up with one reason, one layer, that brings me to another reason, which is another layer, and it just goes on and on. It started simple enough, one meeting to speak my piece about the mascot. But at that meeting in March 2016, I and others of the community were so disrespected by the board. I and others knew something was wrong, and it turned out it wasn't just about the mascot. Refer back to that onion analogy. And thus began our journey. Some of us have completed our journey, and others still press on. And now here we are, closing 2 elementary schools. But I get it. There's no choice. It's too late, it's not fair, it's not right, but it's too late. What is so disturbing about this situation is that 4 of you had warning. It was coming, and you did nothing except defend those that put the district in the situation it's in today. From my perspective, 4 of you owe this community and the parents of these schools an apology, or at a minimum, an acknowledgement that you knew of the financial disaster that this district was sitting on. I have not heard it yet, and I don't expect we will. It was brought to your attention over and over and over. You were repeatedly provided facts contradictory to what you were being provided, and it didn't matter. Even when a recall was instituted against you, you still refused to look at what was going on. To the new board members, Mr. Gracia, Ms. Jankowitz, and Ms. Water, you have an opportunity to make a difference. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I have hope for the future of the district and its students, that you do the right thing, even if you may not agree with parents' opinions, but you will look at what's going on. If a few parents express concern over something, you don't just take the information you're given for granted. That we don't ask you to become an expert on any subject. Just ask questions. Don't just sit there and follow the status quo. Dr. Musetti, thank you very much for having to do the dirty work. I know it's not been easy. Just know that there are people out there that have your back as long as we continue to get information. And one last thing, on the mascot, to save some money, if it'll help one of these schools, if you really need to redo that gym floor, here's some construction-grade Sharpie pens. I'm sure that some of you will be more than happy to scribble it out on the gym floor. Thank you.
Natasha?
Hello there, good evening, Superintendent, President, Vice President, and members of the board. My name is Natasha Engring-Ward, and I'm a parent of a current third grader at Mount George and also a high school teacher. I'm here tonight to speak out again against Mount George's closure. Our school provides a quality education for students here in the Napa Valley and is very highly rated. We have an excellent IB program with outstanding, well-trained teachers. We are a small school and students enjoy our country campus, which has been in operation since 1936. Indeed, our campus recently had a $1 million facelift whereby taxpayers' money from Measure H was used to improve the field and septic system. If the district was thinking of closing our school, I'm wondering why it would invest $1 million of taxpayers' money into it. This just seems to show how little foresight there has been. If the school closes at the end of the year and the property is sold, that money will have been totally wasted. And to put things into perspective, Mount George needs less than half that amount to be funded for a whole year. Also, I would like to point out that the decision-making process has been really rushed. The 7-11 committee has had little time to do any investigation of its own, no time to cover all of the criteria laid out by the California best practices for school closures, or have meaningful discussions about the issues in question. Although the district has now said that Mount George will be consolidated with Outer Heights, nobody really knows what this is going to look like. Time is needed to think about how Mount George's IB program, which is of great benefit to its students, could be set up at an alternative site. Mount George's students are very well prepared for their future studies through being exposed to the learner profile and all the benefits that the IB program offers. The district has invested thousands of dollars in the training of our teachers, and if they are transferred to a school where there is no IB, this money is going to be totally wasted, and students will no longer be able to participate in this wonderful program. Many parents are unsure of what to do next, as there is so much confusion of what their alternatives might be. If they do not live in Mount George District and open enroll to another school but don't get in, it seems that they are unable to revert back to Alta Heights later when more information might be known about the program. Instead, they just default to their home school. How can a parent opt to choose to go to a school when they have no idea about its philosophy or what it will look like, as it hasn't been decided yet? Plans need to have been made well ahead of time so at least parents are familiar with their options. Many parents are touring private schools and may send their sons and daughters there so that they can continue to enjoy a high-quality education, as they are so upset with the district. Ultimately, how much money will the district actually save? You have already acknowledged that if many students opt to go private, that you will not actually make any savings at all. Our school has so much to offer the community, and it is worth saving. Please think carefully about other alternatives. More time is needed to make a better plan for our students' future education. Thank you very much.
Adrian?
Good evening, trustees. Thank you. My name is Adrienne Boudreau. I have two daughters at Mount George. I'm going to take a few minutes here to start off by just giving a shout out to the amazing staff that I've gotten to know over the past few years at Mount George. First of all, Mrs. Tyler, our former principal, and Mrs. Dunn, who has stepped in a very difficult circumstance this year to be a fantastic principal as well. Ms. Chris, who's no longer with us, who was an amazing office manager. The very first year my daughter was in kindergarten, when as a parent you know very little as well. And Ms. Desiree, Ms. Chelsea after her. all the assistants, aides, and specialists who help make sure all the children are receiving the support they need, Mr. Jeremiah, Andrea, Miss B, Miss Freeman, and Miss Trimble. Our librarian, who probably works about 3 times as many hours as she gets credit for, and she still helps me run the book fair, Miss Plews, and our enrichment teachers for music, for Spanish, and for garden. Last but not least, our merry band of educators. We have, sorry, I'm a little emotional, Amanda Retzloff, Jennifer Mitchell, who's had 2 of my kids in kinder. I'll probably hunt Mrs. Mitchell down wherever she is next in another 2 years. Ann Tischer, Dina DeMose, Helen Holman in 1st and 2nd grade, Heidi Meinke, Kim Tidal. In 3rd grade, Heidi's had my daughter for 2 years and has just made her this voracious learner. Our incredible 4-5 combo teachers who are willing to help our 4th graders so much that they're even willing to do a 2nd week of outdoor ed this year so they can go together, just in case they're not able to next year. So that's Leslie Gracia, Laura Holquist, and Katie Garibaldi. If you ever doubt how valued you are as teachers in this system, we do value you very much. And thank you for writing awesome lesson plans as a sub-teacher. I really appreciate that as well. So to the board, I just hope you understand that we were told in a consolidation that if the kids go, our teachers will go together. And that's not really the case. Even if all of our students went to Alta Heights, not all of our teachers would be able to go. Even if all our students went to Alta Heights, it's not a guarantee we'll be able to keep the IB program there. So it's very challenging, as Natasha was saying, to make decisions, but also know that a consolidation in some ways is just kind of like a consolation prize. And so I would hope that no matter what decision you have to make, I understand that this is a business decision and that we have to be viable as a district. But to know that this is an incredibly important program, this is an incredibly important group of staff and families that deserve all the work you can do to try to make sure that that gets to go on. Thank you very much.
Katie Garibaldi.
Good evening, members of the board and district staff. I just wanted to say thank you for your service to our community and your time here tonight. I'm a teacher and a parent at Mount George International School, and I also served on the 7-Eleven committee that's been reviewing school closure consolidations over the last several months. And when we initially heard about the news of possibly closing schools in June, we were promised transparency throughout this entire process. And I applied for the committee because I really believed that a teacher's voice was important, that I'd have good insights to be able to add to the discussions. And I had good faith in what was being said, that the information would be presented, be impartial and fair. What I have seen has not been that. We were told that there was no predetermined agenda through the entire process, and the experience has been a bit opposite. It was clear very early in the process that the district staff was presenting information aligned with their desired outcome in this situation. I took on the responsibility of being on the committee very, very earnestly and spent countless hours in reading and researching. And this decision to close schools, I know, is a very difficult one and a painful one and should be taken very seriously. But it should be include examining every shred of evidence. Staff did not fully address many of the concerns that have been raised by the families, the community, and the committee members during this process. And for example, just a few of them were cost analysis specifically on what each site would save if it was closed, when you take into consideration transportation or maintaining the property, all those sort of things. We never received information on any of the appraisals of what these properties were worth as well. And this whole process, I know it's been said over and over again, but has been very rushed and hasn't given us a lot of time to examine every single option. In order for me to vote in favor for any of the schools, not just the one I'm associated with, but any of the 4 that were put up, I would have had to been absolutely sure that there were no other possible options. And based on the lack of concrete data that I got and viable plans for consolidation, that was provided to the committee, I voted no both on the closures and the consolidation. I challenge you as a board to be inquirers through this process. Please review all of the 7-Eleven committee meetings, ask the hard questions, and demand answers before you choose to eradicate any small school communities. Thank you.
Mallory Macedo.
Mallory, but no worries.
Sorry.
You're good. It's with an I. Blame my parents. Dr. Musetti, members of the board, thank you for allowing me the time to come up here tonight. I am a mom of 2 Mount George Mustangs, a 5th grader and a 1st grader, so Andrew and Ryan. And so I just have a couple of things that I wanted to say tonight. I understand completely that we are in a dire fiscal scenario. I recognize that this has been going on for years and that over the course of the last decade, we have spent our reserves down to 3.6% and are now at risk of state takeover. What I don't understand is how closing Mount George at an operating cost of $407,000 per year is going to help solve this budget crisis. Mount George is a top-performing school and has had a consistent enrollment trend via open enrollment. The International Baccalaureate program aligns with Vision 2020, is listed as one of the only schools in sustaining status within the district, and emulates the inquiry-based approach in every single way. We as a community are now at risk of being split across the district because our program, our International Baccalaureate program, is not being prioritized. We personally, as a family, drove 25 minutes every morning one way for the past 6 years to Mount George for the community, for the staff, for the faculty, but most importantly, for the global focus of the International Baccalaureate program. IB is the hallmark of this school, and we are marketable within the district. That's our desire as NVUSD, isn't it? To be marketable? How do we expect to be marketable and to increase enrollment when we close a top-performing school and a sought-after program? Please take these items into consideration as you make your final decision. On a personal note, I have personally, in the 7-Eleven process and throughout these boards meetings, advocated for a consolidation as we became aware that a closure was inevitable. I now recount those recommendations because the plan set forth is not consolidation. Consolidation is 50-50, and it is prioritization of the wants and needs of both schools, both campuses, both staff, both faculty, both student communities. Our program has not been considered, our faculty have not been considered, and most importantly, keeping our community together has not been considered. So please, in preparation for the October 24th meeting, take these things into consideration when you are making your final decision. Thank you.
Board of Trustees, I am now open for discussion or questions to our Barb Franco or Eric Housley. Well, two.
I just have a clarifying question on process. If we have a question on something that has been addressed by the parent community, is this the time to ask staff questions, or is this just to address the data as it's been the recommendation from the 7-Eleven committee?
You can do both, yeah.
We can do both. Okay. Okay, so one of my questions then would be, I'm sorry. I'm so used to being the loudest one in the room. One of my questions would be, what is the process to, in a consolidation, to address the last, Mallory's, just want to get that right, comment about how do two faculty communities come together? How do you determine, I know it's not an overnight decision, but what is the process for consolidation of the community as it pertains to faculty, curriculum, all of the, all of the issues that are addressed? Is that, do you go to those to sites, talk to site principals, speak with faculty? Is that done separately with Mary Ann, and there's a recommendation made to those sites? I mean, what is, ignorant on my part, I don't know the process.
And I want to piggyback on that, on the consolidation, because we know we've, I think of Willow, right, as part of the processes, so it's not new to the district in that sense, but I'm sure but they're different, right? There's different processes, different communities, different needs, different programs. So if you can also address that as well.
So I'm going to toss to Mary Ann and to Dana in a second, but the term consolidation, there's a spectrum. Consolidation can be implemented in a variety of ways. There's no written sort of technical process that has to be followed to the T. The version of consolidation that was executed on, that Trustee Gonzalez has highlighted, was where there were two schools that came together to create a new school. That is not the circumstance that we're using in the 2020 consolidation plan. That plan was to broaden the boundary of the receiving school. So that would mean taking the boundary students and including them, and through the community engagement and public input that we received, the evolution of that plan was to also give priority to the students that are non-resident, because what's unique is that both schools that are being discussed for closure, both Yountville and Mount George, are predominantly non-resident student attended schools.
I understand.
So they're they're open enrolled schools. This is not about taking two neighborhood schools that have majority attendance of neighborhood students and bringing them together, consolidating them, and creating a new neighborhood school with majority attendance students. That is not the circumstance or the situation or the scenario in this case, in this district with these two schools.
Dr. Massetti, can I throw one thing in from our side?
Yep.
Just, it was clear, so the comment that the whole community would go is false, because it was in the meeting where I actually asked the question about how does faculty go, and there was a comment from staff that according to the contracts of the teachers, it's not, you can't just move everybody over there. And it was even brought up in the fact of, if the 250-ish students, to write in that number from Mount George, if only 180 go, you can't take the whole faculty from Mount George, and you don't know if they're K or 1 or 5 based on, so you don't, it's easy to say the consolidation. So the idea was to try to get as much of the community the option to go.
Right.
But we can't make that, because that's actually a union issue in that consolidation process. So that was clear to the committee, and we did bring that up and ask that question, because we also felt like if we could say, please take the staff to, great, but we knew that that was part of the decision. At least I knew that, and it was brought up as a clarifying question from the committee.
Yeah, and we appreciate you recognizing that we did bring public clarity to that, because the students, the teachers, we have to allocate staffing, FTE is what we call it, positions according to where the students are. So going back to the scenario before I toss to process, the ability to predict numbers tightly becomes more challenging in a scenario where the schools are majority open enrolled, as you can imagine, right? Again, it's a different situation when they're mostly or predominantly resident sites that are coming together to create a new predominantly resident-based site. But with the high degree of open enrollment, the predictability becomes more challenging in that sort of a scenario, because parents are leveraging choice. So to Mr. Housley's point, we don't know if the parents that are currently leveraging choice in those open enrollment schools, if they will continue to leverage choice. Will they all come? Will they leverage choice elsewhere? It is a slightly different scenario in that way, because again, we're talking about mostly non-resident. I know that may not resonate with the residents of Yountville, the resident students and families of Yountville, and the resident students and families of Mount George. But the numbers are smaller. Part of the reason that these are small schools is because they don't have high numbers of resident students in either of those schools. They are students mostly coming from outside the attendance area. So I'll let Mary Ann and Dana speak to some of the staff and school merger process.
So specifically with the staff, So the contract for NVEAs, we're talking mainly about teachers, does specify how teachers are moved from one site to another. NVEA doesn't have something like bumping like CSEA would. So our teachers have to follow the vacancies. And we won't know what those vacancies are until we know where the kids are landing. The contract is, the process that we would follow would be an administrative transfer process, which would give priority to teachers who are being administratively transferred due to closures or due to decline in enrollment before voluntary transfers. If we wanted to have an agreement that there was priority for certain teachers at certain sites to go to other sites and have, say, first priority of those vacancies, we would have to have a negotiated agreement with NVEA. So, I mean, that's something the board could entertain and recommend, but it's not something we could just do. We would have to negotiate that with NVEA, who negotiates on behalf of all of the teachers and have to consider all of the teachers when they enter that type of agreement. So, like I said, in absence of that agreement, the default would be that teachers would follow the vacancies and we would go with administrative transfers. And there's some different tie-breaking criteria, but the main driver in elementary is going to be by seniority.
Is that helpful, Mallory? Is that clarification helpful?
So, and I just want to mention two of the differences at Willow. One thing that happened was that the implementation happened over time. So there was, some of the kids were moved by grade level and some teachers came over. At the same time, some teachers decided to leave that site. So we didn't have to do any differences in contract language because it was so few. We had some people leave the site and we had people come over. So there wasn't, that doing it over time helped in that regard. Also, the district wasn't experiencing declining enrollment over the entire district, and we weren't experiencing having to reduce at other sites at the same time. So that's a complication and something that's happening in this scenario that would impact how flexible we can be with providing choices for teachers and where they move.
Trustee Jankowicz, we also asked in the process of that to make sure, Dr. Massetti, correct me if I'm wrong, that the staff at Mount George was made very aware of the process to apply for the transfer, so they make all the opportunities to try to make it happen? Yeah, because I would assume, based on, there was two messages that we got that were hard. One message was, we're all going to go to private school or we're all leaving, we're mad, which understandably so, emotion-based. And then there was the other side that's like, well, we'd go if we knew the teachers and everybody's going. So we asked about...
What does this really look like?
Right, so then we said, well, can the IB program go? But then it's a decision of the two schools and the new faculty, and if they decide to go that route and start the process again. But the second was to encourage them. So if the concept was all the teachers were going to try to apply to go there, like to try to transfer over, then at least the majority of the students would go. It would probably make the majority of the transition easier. It's just not that simple, right? But we did ask that question, and it was clarified that they would actually make an effort to tell the staff and faculty of Mount George how to go through the process to try to put themselves in there to make that happen as best as possible. Again, it's the best of a bad scenario, right?
Yeah, and I would say, understandably so, staff, parents, understanding the not having all of the information, it makes really, and I think we've heard it again tonight, and we completely empathize and understand that. The issue is that, again, going back to, these are open enrolled schools, until we know where people are going to go, it becomes difficult to have very concrete solidified decisions around some of the program commitments, the staffing commitments. The staff cannot make decisions without knowing where the students are going to be going. So that's what poses the challenge in this scenario.
Would by consolidating and saying Mount George to Alta Heights and Yountville to Willow, doesn't that provide a little bit of direction in terms of just on the side of, of the hopes and thought process of it. I mean, it seems like it's one of those things that unfortunately is up in the air and just really hovering until it drops, which leaves things very uncertain. But I would think, right, that if possible, if a teacher from Mount George, you know, I know we can't prioritize that because that's all goes back to the union, but that's the kind of message or culture that we're setting up, right? Like we want to.
Yeah, but we do have to be very cautionary. We cannot guarantee. We cannot guarantee it. We cannot guarantee positions. We would put ourselves in a really in a difficult spot. We'd be in violation of the contract, and we cannot be in violation of the contract. The contract is there to protect all of the employee rights. So I know folks want those answers before the school board makes decisions, but this is the conundrum. The school board takes action around school closures. The minute if that does happen on Thursday night, the 24th, we've already prepared all of the messaging. There's customized messaging going out to current Mount George families and Yountville parents, seeking their interests as quickly as possible, as soon as possible. And we lay out sort of those options, like, you know, are you going to take the position being offered through the Consolidation Action Plan? Are you going to stay at your, do you want to go back to your resident school, or are you going to leverage open enrollment? We're trying to gather that information as soon as possible. The letter, I think, is scheduled to go out on the Friday after the board meeting on the 24th.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct, yeah.
So that we can start gathering that data, and through the launch of the open enrollment choice process, start getting that information. And as we gather that input, it starts to form what the staffing and some of those requests that are out there.
So I have a question. As I understand it, if the IB process is to be implemented at Alta Heights, they would have to start the recertification process all over, basically from the beginning. And so my question then is, Mount George is already certified. Is their certification tied to a physical location?
Not tied to the location, but tied to the actual school. So the school Mount George is certified as IB. If it is no longer a school, then that program is no longer certified.
But if Mount George were operating in a different location, the certification would go with them?
It's my understanding that IB does not co-locate, does not approve programs like a school within a school model. It's my understanding that they do not approve such programs.
I'm not suggesting a school within a school. What my thought process is if Mount George were to operate out of the Alta Heights school and Alta Heights was to sort of get absorbed into Mount George at the new location, would the IB then continue to be certified?
I can chime in there. The reason that would not work is because we would have to propose action for the school board to take action on closure of Alta Heights. So there's no, that's, I think, what you would be asking. We would have to close, we'd have to take action on closure of Alta Heights and maintain Mount George as a school entity and close Alta Heights. That's not the recommendation that's being brought forth for consideration.
I understand that's not the recommendation, but I just want to understand the feasibility of, would that be a way to maintain the IB program?
We'd have to look in, we'd have to do some research around that. I think what you're asking is to close Alta Heights, reestablish that facility as Mount George Elementary, and then carry over the school code. It would be, because this is all by school code, which I already, as I talk it out loud, don't think that you could do, just transfer one school code from another, and then boom, that you get to preserve program. So that's interesting and sophisticated thinking in that way, but
Curious.
School codes just being plopped from one facility to the next would, I think there's more process to that.
Go ahead. Okay, well, this leads into another idea. We do have an IB school, another IB school, all right? It's at Bel Air.
Bel Air.
And given that it takes 2 years for a program to be certified, and we already have another certified international baccalaureate program. Has there been any consideration about the Mount George students if they want to transferring over to Bel Air?
Some of the things that are happening behind the scenes in the current, next few weeks are that schools like Bel Air, Phillips, Alta Heights, and Willow are all kind of conducting open house kind of environments where members of the community who are interested in learning more about the programs that are offered at these sites, parents can visit and take tours, and all of that has already begun and it's due in large part to inquiries that have been made by parents on behalf of their families.
Okay. Oh, I also wanted to thank Mrs. Franco, Mr. Housley, Mrs. Garibaldi, and Eric Knight was here, and he took off, and I don't know if I've missed any other committee members, but I attended one meeting and watched all of them, and I just want to thank you for your work.
Say something really quick.
So I have a couple of quick questions for staff, and then I'll get back to you guys, so don't go away. We're going with centralized enrollment this year, correct?
Go ahead.
So for this year, no, we're not going to centralized enrollment, but we will be supporting the open enrollment process centrally. So we have staff that will be there. So in terms of centralized enrollment itself is still taken care of at the sites.
Okay.
But in terms of the open enrollment process, that will be done centrally through the building over here. We felt that in looking at moving to centralized enrollment, it would just cause too much pressure in the community to go through such a huge change all at the same time. So we did decide to strategically delay going to a complete online enrollment model until we're finished with this process. So normal enrollment process, but open, and along with the open enrollment process, which is online.
Okay, so they go to their school of residence and fill out the paperwork.
So if you're, let's say again, let's take two examples. So if you're a new kinder student, and you'd like to enroll, you would go to your school of residence, you'd fill out the paperwork there, but then also remember you have the option to choose a school other than your home school, and so then you would participate in open enrollment. The open enrollment process is done completely online. It's up on our website right now. And ready to go for when it opens up on the 28th, and then it will end the last day of November, which I think is the 29th. And that portion of it is an online portion. Now, for families that are already in the system, including families who are potentially affected by school closure, they have the option again, so they'll get a letter the day after the board potentially takes action, along with an email on that Monday. So the email, they'll get an electronic notification also. The electronic notification will be a Google form that will spell out their options. Again, the option would be to choose to participate as a part of the consolidation plan, to return to their home school, or to participate as a part of the open enrollment process. We are going to ask for them to make a decision on that during the open enrollment window. Again, that will be, the deadline would be 11/28. If they do choose to go, so we'll be able to collect, we anticipate a lot of people will fill out that form pretty quick, so we'll have some initial data right away. It will be a Google form, so we'll be able to disaggregate that data. Again, the staff will be working very actively to reach out to people that do not submit a form. And then in terms of open enrollment itself, they would just follow the normal process. Even though we're going to ask families to tell us which of the three options they're going to take, they would still need to go through the open enrollment process if they choose to not take the first two options.
All right, so I'm going to step out of my role a little bit and make a suggestion as you operationalize this sort of mixed model, that you have some forum within the organization to deal with, on almost a daily basis, any ambiguities or contentious applications of policy, because it's a little more complicated than normal, and it's usually complicated enough. So while we are decentralized, stuff occurring at the sites, some of the policy decisions occurring here in the Ed Center, I'm just encouraging you to find a way to keep everybody on the same page. Otherwise, we'll be here at public comment.
Absolutely.
Unfair
Yeah.
process.
And so that work has already started. Trustee Shunk, so Mr. Manguala's response is completely accurate in terms of hybriding, right? Having the centralized open enrollment component with the decentralized non-open enrollment registration process. But we've already started making that shift. So the enrollment center has been tagged here. And we have started to repurpose staff, as we look at all of our staffing because of reductions and whatnot. We're also looking, you open an enrollment center in a school district, you usually add staff. We're not adding staff, we're repurposing some of the staff as opposed to doing a blend of reductions and repurposing for our current needs. So we have already repurposed staff. That staff is staff that has been assigned with the sole focus and purpose to deal with case-by-case situations, to provide a high level of customer service. I probably get daily inquiries from community members already in my email inbox around this situation, this scenario. I know it's happening. Can you help me out? And so we've already started to utilize what we're calling the enrollment services team to start to be the frontline response to all of that. And so we are going to, we have staff that will be solely focused over the next couple weeks on all of this, or the next couple of months on all of this.
All right, that's great. Now, over to you folks.
Yes.
I have a question on whether you're trying to actually tell us something, and it's towards the end of the report. The committee is not recommending the closure of either Alta Heights or West Park at this time, emphasis added on my part. Was there any discussion as to how soon in the future we might have to consider additional schools to be closed? Because I've looked at the history of the district, and we've closed schools from time to time, and sometimes just a few years later we close more schools. So I want to get a feel for how tight things are. And so I'll stop there and let you respond.
Well, I'll do the best I can to answer that, knowing that it's on TV and Howard is sitting here. West Park has a high number of resident students that attend that school. And one of the criteria that was looked at is the geographical access in terms of students. And they had a high number of resident students and not as high a number of open enrolled students. So that was my belief, is why West Park came off the radar. And anybody, staff, correct me if I am getting that part wrong. The other school in Alta Heights was the same, right? They had the high, I think Alta Heights numbers, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but my recollection is that Alta Heights also had a high number of resident students, which would mean that in both of those schools' cases, closing either one of those two schools would have created a situation of more students that would have to be relocated. At Yountville, there's 36 resident students that attend Yountville, so that's a lower number. Right. And I think Mount George was 116, I think.
62.
Or 62, okay. So that was a big factor.
So the big factor was more based on the number of resident students. The two schools together were 99 students that were resident, and I think Alta Heights was closer to 114, and West Park was 130, 140, somewhere in there. The recommendation right now was based on a few factors. Is one, there is declining enrollment, but the concept to say, let's go ahead and plan on closing, my suggestion would be West Park, if we had to down the road, and that's personal, not a committee, because it's so close to Pueblo Vista. But we won't know any of those details till Napa Pipe projects happens, and if our economy changes in the next 4 years, and if all of a sudden the housing becomes affordable in the Napa Valley, good luck. So all of those things, that would be a completely false recommendation at this point. So at this point, we just said at this time, we're not recommending to close these two schools. Secondarily is, based on the numbers, is if Mount George, if the entire school went to the Alta Heights site, all of a sudden Alta Heights is one of the larger schools in the district, so they then become off the smaller schools kind of list. So that's why we just kind of said at this point, that's not what we're suggesting. So everything kind of at that point kind of just made sense, but we didn't, we just felt to put that. So no, there was no suggestion in that. We were just saying at this point, we can't do it, but obviously there's still a consideration on the numbers as of now.
Okay.
Can I just, on that comment of the factors, because I also was following online and being here, but facilities was also a big part of your conversation, if I recall, in terms of determining which schools
Could handle what?
could handle the capacity part.
Yeah, so the second meeting when Mr. Pearson went back and clarified some of those numbers, we actually got truer numbers of what each facility could actually handle. So if we did have to make a budget cut number and say, like, we need to close a school, where can people go? Alta Heights was an easy one to say, let's keep it, because it can handle, I think, 190 more kids approximately, which is a huge number. Mount George could handle 30 to 40, and I think Yountville could have handled about 60 to 70, but still would have been the smallest, even with those or somewhere in there, they still would have ended up the two smaller schools. But yes, there was facilities and the possibility of bringing in portables, and so we tried to talk about some of those ideas to see if those would have been options as well.
And it's really the empty classrooms that are on many of our campuses. Like, if you walk different campuses, elementary schools, there's a number of empty classrooms that now potentially, if this all works, those empty rooms sitting at Alta Heights will be ready to welcome students, and the same thing will happen at Willow.
Thank you for clarifying that.
I'm going to go back to staff on the IB program. I understand it's a 2-year process. So ideally, what makes a school a candidate to apply for the IB program?
Well, the staff have to commit to the IB programs, the principals, they have to commit to the really intense training that takes time for a teacher to become IB certified, IB trained completely. So there's first a generating of a commitment to that model, and then a plan for the training of staff over time. And then there are certain kind of proofs, so to speak, where the school has to demonstrate that it is fully functioning as an international baccalaureate instructional program, and that's how the certifications happen.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, Mr. Housley and Ms. Franco, you mentioned something about the before and after school program and something about the city of Yountville. Would there be a memorandum of understanding, or was it just an assumption that the city of Yountville would take on the busing, or I just would like more details about that.
Okay, so the recommendation on transportation would be an NVUSD, a recommendation that would come to you folks in terms of approving that, in terms of busing the Yountville kids, that I think it's 7 miles from Yountville to Willow. It's a 2-mile trek from Mount George to Alta Heights. Typically, busing would potentially not be offered for students in that close range. I think board policy is 3 miles. I don't know if I'm exactly correct on that, but I know there's some board policy around busing. So that is another decision that comes forward to you folks in terms of the conversations we had as a committee, as well as what we heard from parents in terms of them being relocated, and transportation became an issue. Yountville has from what we've learned, a very robust before and after school program that I'm not sure if that's an NVUSD program or if it's NCOE. I'm not sure who operates that program, but one of the things that was important to the committee was, as those students move from Yountville to Willow, that Willow is able to absorb the Yountville students and also replicate to the best of their ability with their before and after school program some of the program options that were available to Yountville kids. So really looking at, what could Willow's before and after school program look like after absorbing the Yountville kids, and the same thing with Mount George. And Eric may know more about that Yountville than I do.
So the busing side was kind of, I believe staff kind of said they already had a plan and they were planning on making sure that that was taken care of. The committee just wanted to make sure that it was reiterated.
To resident students.
Yes, for resident students, correct. And then, yes, the after-school program, again, I don't know who it's run by. I know Jennifer Carvalho and somebody that recently retired from up there have been running it for years. And so all we were suggesting was, if Willow is over-impacted, is to find a way to either figure out. So our suggestion was to make sure staff found a way to say, we'll talk to the Yountville community, we'll have the busing provided immediately, you can still run your after-school program if it's run by them, or we'll make sure the students have an after-school program that we'll enlarge it so it can handle the students from Yountville with the program. So we were just suggesting that somehow we find a way to make sure those kids have those options, either A, still on the Willow campus, or B, allow for the transportation immediately after school so then they could have that option at Yountville for the resident students again.
So I'll share with the board, I think I shared this with the 7-Eleven committee when we started touching the topic of after-school program that becomes really relevant, it's really relevant at all the sites, is that, we, in my first year and a half here, I identified that we have lots of variance and we have lots of inequities and program variance with after-school care and program implementation across the school district. So we have Boys and Girls Club offerings, we have the ACES grant, which is not administered by the Napa Valley Unified School District. It's actually a grant that is administered through the Napa County Office of Education. So their programs run at some of our sites. And then we have ones that are private for fee programs as well. Did I hit most? Those are really kind of our three service delivery models. And there has not been a lot of centralized focus or support around that. I think that is nested in the idea that when you start with your biggest program, which is your ACES program, and we are not the grantors, and we outsource that to the County Office of Education, you already start down a pathway where, as a school district, we're not kind of taking a stance around after-school programming. So that is a look for me and the new team over the course of the next couple years from a big picture standpoint. So that's just the state of after-school in NVUSD. With the focus at these sites, when we went to Alta Heights and when we went to Willow, because we also did community meetings with parents at the receiving schools, those schools, just like Yountville in particular, like both Chair Franco and Vice Chair Housley have mentioned, there was a huge ask around paying attention to this after-school program because, again, highly open enrolled schools, major commuter parents, probably implies working parents. A lot of folks are going to need an option beyond the 3 o'clock dismissal time. So that was heard at the schools impacted with the closure decision. At the receiving consolidation sites, they shared that their programs are already impacted, that they have waiting lists already at their schools, and now we know that there's going to be a pressing need if these students actually, take the opportunity to have a spot at those schools. So we have work to do once the decision becomes official on expansion of after-school programming at both these schools. And we have to expand after-school programming across the district. We have to look at it as a systemic issue across the district, but obviously we will advance the dialogue and discussion at these two impacted schools because we're going to have we're going to have a lot of need. We have the need already, and we're going to have more with the schools growing. The second thing that surfaced is at your receiving schools where they're already paying something, their hope is that we pay attention to the pricing model and what we ask parents to pay. They don't want to have to feel like the parents are absorbing the that the parents are being asked to pay for the expansion, right? So as a staff, when folks are asking about the details of school consolidation and how much does it cost, these are all of the things that we will have to look at. And we know transportation is a cost for a small number of students, and the expansion of after school there will be some costs there. But that's something we need to do across the district, and an investment we're going to have to make, especially in a declining enrollment environment, because you can't compete without a good ASP program.
Any more questions?
No, I just have a statement.
Go ahead.
So first, let me say I greatly appreciate the work that was done by the committee. I have great respect for the people that sat on that committee, as I know it was not an easy task. Having sat on both sides of the podium, I appreciate how difficult some of those meetings were. I attended all of them and saw the work that you guys were doing. Having said that, I didn't hear the argument that I was concerned about, either from the district or from the community, and that we're being asked to make this business decision. And so when I examine the closure of these schools, I think about return on my investment as a school board member, and where those dollars are getting the biggest bang for their buck. And so I would want to look at some of the schools that were mentioned, and I think about, okay, what will we want to get from a small school? What are we hoping for? We're hoping for a tight-knit community that fosters high academic student achievement. And there's one school in particular of the 4 that was not recommended for closure that I don't feel is attaining that high academic achievement. And so I believe that is one of the schools that we should be considering for the chopping block, rather than the 2 that were recommended, because what we're hoping to achieve with these small schools is high achievement. And when we're not getting that return on our investment, it feels to me like that's where we should be looking. Furthermore, the school that I'm talking about is more costly to run than Mount George is, and would provide greater funds on an annual basis for the general fund if we were to close that school. And finally, I think that the property itself is much more valuable if it were to be developed, which would be useful to us because that would generate more revenue that we could use to fix up some of our other schools. So those were kind of my thoughts on why maybe we should be considering a different school than the 2 that were recommended. I felt like the other 3 schools sort of achieved that academic benchmark. And so then we would look to those other 3 and say, okay, well, where is the outlier? And I think you guys nailed it when you mentioned that, Yountville, unfortunately, is just too small. And we've heard a lot from the people in Yountville about how important that school is to their community. And I would love to be able to keep that school open, but as a school board member, I'm tasked with the responsibility not to build the community of Yountville or subsidize their sports activities, but instead to do what's best for the students in NVUSD. And I appreciate how important that school is, but when we're letting teachers go and not building new schools, making charters pay their fair share, and slashing positions across the district, building town camaraderie is unfortunately not a luxury that NVUSD can any longer afford. And so that's why my suggestion is not to close Mount George, but rather Yountville and West Park.
If I may, I think what becomes really difficult is that you have some very pragmatic decisions that are made within an issue that is very emotional, and it's really hard to look at things objectively. I want to commend the committee because I believe that you addressed the criteria that needed to be addressed. Unfortunately, student achievement can be analyzed a multitude of different ways. There are definitions of achievement that are applicable to certain learning communities, and I think we can't generalize and compare schools on one standardized, in one standardized manner. But more importantly, what I think becomes difficult is that you have to stay on task. And with clarity, you had to look at the issues that you were given and the parameters that were given to make the decision, or to make the recommendation, pardon me. And I believe that that was done. I don't, as much as I would love to make decisions on how much you love your school and community and all of those things that are so important, and I am not dismissive of how important they are. You have well articulated them, you have been passionate, you've had tenacity that I have admired, and I commend you for advocating as well and hard as you have. What is difficult is to keep the decisions that have to be made predicated on the criteria that were given, and I think what you have said is real, it's emotional, I understand it, but I think it falls outside of the criteria that I believe you addressed and did a very, very difficult, but a good job in understanding and allowed for a broad level of comprehension for a lot of very complicated data. And while there may have been intent, the school district, Dr. Massetti, they have a responsibility to be stewards of the entire district. And I think that's difficult because we'd love to break it up in a lot of different components, but we can't do that. We have to look at it as a whole. And I think what you did well is you looked at us as a whole and made a decision that will in the long run benefit all the students of NVUSD. And I thank you.
Any other questions or discussion?
Yeah, I would just like to take a quick minute to respond in that, to Robin, in that I think that I don't believe that the boundaries that we have arbitrarily drawn around the schools is necessarily the important or correct reasoning to base the decision upon. As we could draw the boundaries in any manner that we see fit, and we could put...
I didn't mean boundaries.
We could put however many people into various schools at a whim by redrawing those boundaries. So I do at some point have a hard time using that as the major criteria in order to make this decision.
I don't think that was the major criteria. I mean, I think the major criteria was financial sustainability, financial stewardship, being responsible for budgetary decisions that will benefit all of the students of NVUSD, looking at our cash reserves, and finally being at a point in our financial maturity that we make really hard decisions that are so difficult, but that in the long run will serve us all well. We can't take the short-term view, we have to take the long-term view, and sometimes the long-term view is painful. So it's not a boundary decision, it's not even just one decision, it is the kind of compilation of all of these different issues that have to be looked at. And when the underlying asset of a business, if you will, in quotations, are children, it's difficult. It's hard to make a decision that does not feel painful. But what I believe in is that our long-term responsibility is to provide the best education, the best resources we can for every single child at NVUSD. And if we are limited in our ability to allocate those resources because we're not making tough financial decisions in the short term, our long-term story is very different. And I would like to be able to start telling the story of how well we are doing at NVUSD. And I think it's time for that story to be told. And this is one of the very difficult things that we need to do in order to take that first step, to write the book, to tell the story, and to be proud of what we've done. I'm sorry.
Just a closing comment. Again, thank you very much for the extensive report, the entire 7-Eleven committee. During my work hours, I joined you for the 4-hour meetings and with a couple pauses here and there. I do believe our schools, all of them have potential. I don't think there's a such thing as schools are smarter than others. I just think that some need more love, of course. We have more work to do. So when I think about like high academic achievement, to me, it's more, we have more work to do for those low test scores, or what are we not doing? Because I feel that staff, teachers, administrators, and our children are still working just as hard at those low-performing schools. So when it's generalized as a high academic achievement school, or schools, I would like for all of us to think that, we do have schools that are in low economic disadvantage. They are children suffering or going through English as a second language, so it's learning 2 languages, only one. And so piggybacking on just standardizing, it's really hard to standardize absolutely anything or any of our decisions just based on high academic achievement, because that'd be silly. But I'm trying to be equitable, and that is listening to absolutely everything you had to say, the public, and also taking into consideration that, yes, I sat here and there was many different financial responsibilities on behalf of myself and other board members. But the one thing that I did do was hire Dr. Massetti, and that is to bring clarity to our district, to bring up these special and difficult topics that possibly we weren't seeing. And so when I'm told that I'm not doing anything sitting here on this board, I take it very, very offensively, because it took us a long time to find someone that was able to bring up these topics, these hard topics, especially to the public. So I thank you again, and if we do not have any more discussion, we move forward with our agenda. Cindy.
I've only been on the board since last December, but as some of my colleagues know, I've been a frequent presence, appearing at that board, usually complaining about something. So I'm looking at the last several months as being this, payback in a way. And even the people who have been upset with me, there's one person who is not here tonight, but often is, and he said, and I sent him an email and said I'd be glad to see him, and he said, "Oh, really? I thought everybody hated me. I thought they just rolled their eyes when I come up to the podium." And I said, "I'm just glad you're involved." And I am glad, because frequently I would be the only person here, And so now we know what gets people out, talking about closing schools. This is all coming around because our community is changing. Families with young children cannot afford to live here. It's not just Napa. It's happening in San Jose. They closed a bunch of schools the other night. It's happening all over the state. It's happening. And that is real. And it's not anybody's fault who's sitting up here, and it's not your fault out there. There have been decisions made. Political and economic decisions were made over the last many years. I've lived here for 3 decades. I sat on a city council, and I saw decisions made, construction decisions that favored the wealthy, the retired, And, lots of us saw it coming. It can't and couldn't stop it. This is it. I think one of the reasons we are in the situation we're in is that some people placed a great deal of faith in certain housing developments being constructed. Well, I've heard Napa Pipe. People are writing to me about Napa Pipe constantly. I guess it's making progress, but there is no guarantee that families with children are going to move into those houses. Just as there were people who are actually surprised that the houses at Register Square, a few blocks from where I live, they're townhouses that are $1 million. They don't have yards. They're 3 blocks from my house. And I must be one of the few people in the world who doesn't relish a bunch of rich people moving into my neighborhood. But it's a change. But I look around and there are no children, and there are no children anymore in my neighborhood. So okay, there are 2 at a rental 2 doors over. That's it. And it's not so, the world, I'm getting grayer, our community's getting grayer. This is what we are living with. This is the reality we have to deal with. And yet, strangely, we do have enough people with lower income jobs who, things like, when there was a question about why some children at a certain school didn't do well on the achievement tests a couple of years ago, I'll tell you why. We had a fire. People were out of work. The hospitality industry took a beating. The people who work and serve in those industries took a hit. When people are when families are under economic stress, their children, are stressed, and their performance at school is different. And if I sound a little emotional, I am, because I taught next door at Napa High School. In 2009, I had children in my class crying because their parents were losing their houses, losing their jobs. And, I want all of our students to succeed. And I believe that the very successful, charming, intelligent, and articulate children who came up and spoke are going to be successful at any school they attend. I don't think everyone's happiness and success depends on one single little cocoon. I think that there are many ways people can succeed. And our job is to make that happen. And we can't do it if we're broke. We can't. And yet every day when I taught, I saw teachers doing great work, and I want us to get this settled and move on and make it possible for people to do the great work and for us to be able to tell people about it. That's it. Thank you.
Vice President Martin, could I say something really quick? As a business person, when I see things changing and I start to see my business change, like as the grocery store in Yountville, my town's changed. A third of the community doesn't live there anymore, right? The people that I grew up, I was the only white kid in class. When it was ELL reading time, I'd sit there by myself. It was awesome. Wondering what was wrong with me. I'm like, what's going on? Things have changed, but as a business person, you have to change with it. And if I were to task you guys with anything, because you guys know my story enough that sometimes life's thrown at you, right? And I agree with you. These children will thrive and survive wherever they go. I think it's important. I went to a small university at Pepperdine. It was the right place for me. I probably would have never shown up to class at UCLA, but my teacher called me if it was 8 a.m. and I wasn't in class, right? Sometimes those things happen, but we all find our place. I task you to start to be proactive, because this is reactive. This is because people didn't do their job. I won't say who didn't do their job, but people didn't do their job. And now we're where we're at. So my suggestion would be proactive. Build the after-school programs where we can get kids, where parents can continue to work and not have to take time off because they have something for their children to do, that they know they're safe and they can be in a place where they're learning. Find ways to be proactive, because why is it that our country is so strong? that the United States, or California specifically, is the 4th GMP in the world, yet we are trash in this country of what we're spending on our children. So how do we find a way to do that? How do we find a way to be proactive? We have the community that'll support that. And I'm not convinced that it's a small school when I see Canyon Oaks numbers being the #1 in the district. And, but I'm not saying it's because you're in a small school that it is or isn't. I'm just saying I'm just not convinced with that number. What I'm convinced of is that we have to be better at what we do. Because most of the time, government is reactive. And that's why the government doesn't work in most settings. It's best to privatize what we can. But I say that to you guys is find committee people to come in and start to find ways to be proactive, to raise money, to have programs. I've done my research on Dr. Massetti too. I'd be very excited to allow her to deal with programs rather than budget cuts. But we can't do that right now. So hopefully, hopefully we have something that we can start to turn this around, because I've seen that this community really comes behind us, that we really do that, but we need to be more proactive. And I task you guys to be at the forefront of being proactive in our community. I'd love to go to the United States and say, we're doing something different here. This is why Napa Valley is growing and how this is changing. So let us know. I'm sure there's some of us that would be willing to help. I'm sure there's parents here with some great ideas as well that we can try to do that, but I task you with that, so.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you both. Yeah, that's the best way to close this, but, and I'm not gonna add, I'm just gonna echo, with Trustee Water, Robin, and Isela had shared. I think my comment was related to that in terms of, looking at the future and looking at the possibilities, and how exciting that makes me think about that. We did hire Dr. Massetti to focus on programs, but fortunately, we have a great leader here that dove into things a lot deeper and surfaced areas of our budget and our situation that we hadn't known before. So I think that we're doing that homework, and where I'm trying to get at is the type of culture that we're trying to set as well. And the type of culture is community engagement. And from the beginning of her leadership has been a lot of that engagement and a clear path to where we want to get at with our strategic plan. And with that, and it's an engagement in both languages too. It's an engagement of making sure that we are hearing the voices of all of our parents from across American Canyon all the way to Yountville, and to address those issues and concerns that are very, very complex. There's multiple of layers that come with this, but I think that's the message, and I want to, with my hope here, is to continue to build on that trust, to continue to keep us on check, to bring your comments. This is important to us. This is, to me, believe it or not, my most favorite part is to hear comments. It really is. You know, I come from a country where I wish my parents would have had that opportunity to come to a podium and express, their concerns and hear from you what you're feeling and your passion and your love and care, because that's what drives us to do a better job. And that's the kind of invitation that comes from the cabinet and also comes from the board. So, and I also want to thank the committee for all your time and commitment as well.
Any more discussion? I know it's 5 minutes to 10, but I want to do a check-in, if that's okay with you. And if we can go half hour?
Yeah, we're good until 10:30.
10:30, okay, perfect.
We're good.
Perfect. Give us a little moment. Yeah. We are on reports. Board of Education and Student Board Representative who's absent. Mr. Gracia?
Sure. So October 1st, I had a tour of the Napa High campus. Got to see some of the cool things they're doing in the robotics department. On the 2nd, I attended the district branding meeting where we're looking at ways to better communicate with the public. And then on the 4th, I judged the Napa High homecoming floats and attended their football game. I was disappointed to see that the flagpole wasn't working properly that day, and Napa ended up losing that game to their friendly rivals from American Canyon. On the 9th, I was scheduled to visit New Tech, but the school was closed that day because of the power outages, so that'll be rescheduled at some point. And then on the 18th, I attended the Napa versus Justin football game, and Napa did win that one, and I was glad to see that the flagpole was back in working order. So that was good. And that's all that I got to report.
Earlier this month, or late last month, I met with Vernon Billey, the Executive Director of CSBA, along with a couple of my colleagues. Thank you, Elba, for helping to set that up. And this past Friday, I attended the Professional Development Day at American Canyon High. It was for the entire district. It just happened to be hosted at American Canyon High.
Okay, power outages, earthquakes, I think we're all, and fire, so I think we're all kind of just tired of it. But anyhow, we are here because our meeting was rescheduled due to the power outages. This Friday, I'll be visiting MVLA at 9 in the morning. And then I had the opportunity to join Napa High School with Day of Impact, Bite of Reality. So it was Redwood Credit Union came out and helped all these young kids budget for the future. So gave them a checkbook, and then they were allowed to purchase items all throughout. So you were given a fantastic profile, and some were, bricklayers, some others were, scientists. Mine couldn't have been a little bit, it hit close to home. I was an ag scientist, they give you your salary and what your spouse brings in, and then they give you your profile, whether you have children or not, and, rent or you own a home. So you kept going all around, and they'd give you the cost of living. And so at the end of the day, I want to say American Canyon High School had approximately 400, or I might have these numbers turned around, 400 or 450, and Napa High had 400 or 450, I'm sorry. And Valley Oak had their senior class, which was a much smaller one. The cool thing about Valley Oak was they didn't have to do the paperwork. They were actually given the app on their cell phone, so it was much easier and fantastic. So my son participated in that. I asked him how much money he had left over. He had $40 after his entire salary was, he said, you know what, I didn't give up these kids, Mom, that were on my profile. So I said, just don't follow the profile, okay? So really, really nice to see something like this. I'd like, some ironing class, how to wash dishes, stuff like that happening. I'm kidding.
That's a second class.
Right, I'm sure. But I absolutely, I have to say that our speaker, and I wanted to say this while he was here, one of our student of the month, the adult school, Pedro? One? Can't remember. Mr. Sanchez. I wanted to take, when he was speaking, it brought a tear to my eye, and I'm like, we take advantage of our language at times, and we don't realize how bad someone really wants to learn it. And so it gives me pride and joy, because it took my father almost 35 years to learn the English language, and someone so dedicated took him 3 years. So when I hear some people say that it's impossible to learn the English language, it is possible, and that was actually proof. Thank you so much.
I too was at that meeting with Vernon Billey, and so it was really great to hear his perspective. I got a chance to ask him about what we're going through with the 7-Eleven committee, and just kind of get his experience as he travels all over the state and goes to different school districts, and just really commended our bravery and our thought process of going through something like this, because he's seen one too many school districts be taken over and lose control of their district. So, which is a very scary thought for me. So, that to me was very helpful to hear someone with such experience share that thought. And I'm just looking forward to my site visits that Vera has been putting together for me, and I look forward to visiting all the schools in my area, which is not a big list. So I actually, but I want to add. We'll see if we can add a few more, a little more in the spring as things quiet down. But thank you.
Fast. The last 2 weeks have been really busy. I've had a lot of parent meetings, most of which began with a specific issue, but then branched into a broader discussion of education. So that was great, actually. We didn't always agree on everything we were speaking about, but learning curve for me. I attended all the 7-Eleven committee meetings. This one was drafting of the report. I won't reiterate. I too attended another branding committee where once again I feel like I'm on an extended listen and learn tour. I did spend a morning at McPherson, and I had an exceptional day where I enjoyed my tour from the student ambassadors. I not only got a snapshot into many of the different student learning communities, but I also experienced the really innovative ways that they are supporting their students, their emotional and social well-being, as well as their academic goals. If you haven't had a chance to walk into that kindergarten program, they're dancing and they're singing, but they're listening and learning, and they're watching a visual and getting prompts. It was just fantastic. And they have peace stations set up in the classrooms where if a child just wants to find their center, take a breath, they can go and you can write, you can hold a ball, you can do all these different activities, just so supportive of the student body. So if you haven't had a chance to go out and visit McPherson, I recommend doing so. And then my legacy program and cheer both had to be rescheduled, as did our Masters in Governance, and I'm moving to Idaho due to Mother Nature.
Not Idaho.
No, I did, or maybe Wyoming.
Oh, no, they have earthquakes in Wyoming, all the fracking. Okay, well, actually, I've done nothing because I was gone for 2 weeks, although I was visiting my son who's teaching in Massachusetts, where the property taxes are outrageously high, and the schools are very well funded, and they've got a terrific public transportation system. Yes, that's great. It's great. And yes, I know it gets cold in the winter, and I don't care about that. And then I came home to no lights, no nothing, but at least I had running water, even though it was cold. And an ice-cold shower with Dr. Bronner's soap is very invigorating. I recommend it. Howard's dying over there, I know, but it's true. But now I'm back. Oh, I have done a lot of reading. I want to know if Mr. Grassi has read that book I gave him yet. Have you?
Not quite yet.
Do it. And I want to report back, I'm giving you until November. And then, okay, but I'm back to true form. I am double booked tomorrow morning, so I'm going to have to bail on the breakfast because I have a date at Pueblo Vista. Thank you for getting that for me. And then tomorrow night, I'm going to the American Canyon concert. Yes, I'm taking a former student of mine with me. She's looking forward to it. And I'm going to run over to Napa High and buy my tickets because I really want to win that car. And I'm just glad to be back in the groove. And Vintage High School, their pottery department is having a pasta fundraiser. Yeah. Call up about that because you get a pottery bowl. It's $20, basically all you can eat, and the AP ceramics class is putting it on, and it's really you walk home with a beautiful dish. So I recommend it, and it's open to the public. So I'm back in the groove.
When is the pottery thing? Because I went to that with the chili last year, and it was a nice bowl.
Yeah, it's not this week. It's like I think it's something like the 26th.
I'll find out.
Yeah. Yeah, Sarah Brown. Yeah.
I had one last comment. I forgot to mention this. Since we're shaking, by the way, Pleasant Hill shook 3.4 while we were here in this meeting at 7. But anyhow, there is the great shakeout I don't know if you guys participate as a school district because it's a huge entity, and just wanted to invite the school district if you do participate, and then you send in your pictures to the state. That way we promote it. I know that in other years we have. I don't know if we still partake in the Great Shakeout, so I believe that's 2 days away. And just
What
kind
is
of a
it?
reminder. So the whole entire state of California on 10/16 goes into a generic forming earthquake drill, and then I believe it starts at 10:16 in the morning. So 10/16, 10/16, or 17. Sorry, there you go. So it's not that far away, but I mean, I think we got our scare yesterday.
I will be brief because it's late. I wanted to say that I had probably one of the most exceptional moments of my 1.5-year tenure, which was on Friday, having the opportunity to address all of the NVUSD teachers in under one roof. It's been described as historic. It was a first time. And it was something that in the first week that I came here, noticed that we didn't have, and was relentlessly committed to creating that structure so that we could start to come together as a learning community and create more equitable access to high-quality professional development to all teachers, not just contingent upon a particular school, a particular grant, or a particular opportunity or someone you know who told you, but rather all teachers 2 days a year getting that access, and then just having a venue as a superintendent to be able to address all of the certificated staff. So we had approximately 855 of our teachers attend. There's great pictures on the website. So it was really great. In the past, I was told by NVEA today, even when there were district-wide professional development days, they never brought all of the faculty together under one house in that way. So it was usually like, maybe co-location of different sites and different schools kind of coming together at different places. But so that was really exciting, and it reminded me why I'm here and why I want to continue to do the work here. There was just a really positive day. It was a great day in NVUSD. I also want to commend my staff for the planned safety public safety plant power shut off. PSPS. The acronym hasn't stuck yet. Everybody had to do a lot of work around it. Rob Manguala and Mike Pearson served as kind of our district leads, both interacting with emergency operations in the county and PG&E, and they've got stories for days around all of that. But the bottom line is I do think that there was pretty close to flawless execution for a district of our size in an area, a school district that was impacted with the number of schools that were actually literally had their power shut off. I think that we spent a lot of time preparing for it, and I think it went exceptionally well. If you have to do that, I think that we did the best job possible for experiencing that as a first time. And I also I want to thank the communications team, them staying in constant connection with the communications team, making sure we were getting timely communication, and it was under really difficult, kind of stressful conditions to make sort of decisions on what was going to be the best decision. The business office making, double checking on doing the research around, the waiver and the reimbursement, and then Dana having to quickly put together messages and thoughts about what employees and who comes and who doesn't come. So it really was an all hands on deck emergency response. All of our communication was bilingual, instantly translated, so we were making sure that we were outreaching to our Spanish-speaking community as well, which I know is really important. So go team, super proud. Thank you for all your hard work. Yes. And then there's so much I want to share, but it's late, and the last thing I want to say is that visit with the executive director of the California School Boards Association was very fruitful. I did also appreciate all of his affirmations around some of the courageous work we're having to do as a governance team. He did entertain the idea of inviting us last minute to be presenters at the conference around the interest-based problem-solving approach, and he stuck to his word and pursued it, and we are now slated to present on Friday afternoon. and Trustee Shunk, we decided to put another thing on our plate, and we'll have a Thursday presentation around around student health and wellness, and Ms. Page and Ms. Young will be joining us on Friday for a human resources employee relations workshop focused on IBPS and how that can inform other school boards across the state on how to consider the approach. So, yeah.
See, we're starting our story.
Okay. All right, good evening. So I can't not talk about Friday's Professional Learning Day, even though it's already been mentioned, but I have some appreciations that I really need to share. Again, you heard already over 850 staff members of all kinds of different classifications gathered at American Canyon High School, and we gathered feedback from every session, and it is overwhelmingly positive. So we're on the right track. I want to thank the Board of Education for placing value on this kind of event and giving us the opportunity to exercise professional learning for all of our classifications. I also want to thank the many staff who contributed to the day's success, including most of the staff sitting on this side of the room, but also a lot of our support staff from our tech team, our custodial team, clerical staff, food services staff who all came together. Again, that same concept of all hands on deck to get something special to happen for our staff. And my final thanks is to Pat Andrew Jennings, who is the Director of Professional Learning in the Instructional Services Division, and the District Academic Specialists, Chrissy Cotton, Kathy Norman, Tracy Weiss, and Carly Miller, who together took all of the planning work and then executed excellently on all the details that go into a big event like we had on Friday. And so if you need somebody to plan your event, I got some folks. Tomorrow is another special day, though, another kind of semi-historic day. We have PSAT Day tomorrow for all juniors happening at American Canyon High School, Napa High, Vintage High, and New Tech High. All 11th graders will participate in taking the PSAT tomorrow morning during the school day, funded by the district. This opportunity will undoubtedly increase college and career awareness for our students. It gives them access to scholarships. It gives them access to information about colleges, support materials that come to them from the College Board, and students will have a better sense of what to prepare for when taking the SAT. We wish all of our 11th graders a successful day tomorrow. My final update is regarding the annual CASP score release. Students in grades 3 through 8 and 11 took the California Assessment of Student Progress and Performance each spring, and overall, results show that 47.9% of our students achieved at the standards met or standards exceeded in English language arts, and 34.8% of our students performed at the standards met or standards exceeded in math. And in comparison to last year, to the last available year, which is 2018, we increased slightly, just under 1% in ELA and just over 1% in math. A formal presentation of the CASP results will be provided to the Board of Education and the community during the October 24th board meeting. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Good evening. I have just one really exciting thing to share tonight. This is a first for NVUSD. We actually had our 2018 2021 CSEA contract translated into Spanish and shared with our employees. So while all of our employees have at least a basic level of English to perform the duties of their job, commensurate with their positions, the contract represents, a detailed guidelines as far as their rights and their responsibilities, and it's incredibly important that if somebody does not have the full command of English to understand the written English, that they have access to this so they can fully understand their rights and responsibilities as our employees. So that's very exciting. I worked with the translator to kind of go through and make sure that we had, to clarify little bits and pieces in the contract that were not 100% clear. And we did put a disclaimer in the Spanish version of the contract, just in case there is, because there's always little differences in translations, but we just made the disclaimer that the English version is the absolute go-to for any disputes, but this just gives people access generally to the information. So this is our goal 5, creating an inclusive organizational culture in action.
Facilities and bond program update? Oh, sorry. Sorry.
I'll try and make it
Quiet.
quick. I'll model that for everybody. I'm going to just focus on two departments today. So I'm going to focus on the technology department and the enrollment department. So the technology department has been working diligently to deploy Promethean boards into the classrooms beginning in the Southern District in American Canyon and then working their way north. At this point in time, we've completed almost all of the schools in American Canyon, so I encourage you to stop by a classroom and see what it looks like. We've had very positive feedback from our teachers about the impact they're making on teaching and learning in the classroom. Our Promethean board trainer, Ashley Green, has already completed numerous training sessions, which included running 3 sessions at our professional development day and providing training to a total of 77 teachers. We're also starting to deploy Chromebooks pretty heavily at the elementary level, and again, trying to look at things from an equitable standpoint. We're starting that in the northern end of the district and working our way south with the idea that the two projects would cross at some point in time. While we have some Chromebooks, we'll be bringing forward requests to purchase additional Chromebooks and Chromebook carts as we need them. At the elementary level, we will be using the cart model where every teacher will have a Chromebook cart in the classroom. In terms of enrollment, we are gearing up for the open enrollment session, or season, I should say, which starts October 28th and continues through November 29th. We also have a very large presence on the website. That concludes my report.
Good evening. So the several departments that I oversee, we'll start with the maintenance department. Head of shop, several head of shop members are from the maintenance and grounds departments are participating in a year-long leadership course offered through North Bay School Insurance Association. Once a month, the M&G leadership members attend this day-long workshop learning about excellence in supervision, which includes self-discovery, creating a positive work environment, how to facilitate change, positive coaching, communication, building strong teams, and ethics and cultural proficiency in the workplace. This is really kind of transformational for members of our department. We asked them to report out, and when they, after each of their sessions, and all the individuals are speaking glowingly of the education, the self-reflection, and the ability to collaborate with colleagues at these workshops. On Friday, October 11th, it was expressed about the professional development that was offered for our certificated. Some of our classified had some professional development. Our custodians toured the Napa Recycling Waste Services plant, and in anticipation of the rollout of several hundred compost bins that schools in the city of Napa that will be taking place. So I don't know if you know this or not, but we happen to be the largest generator of trash in the city of Napa. And so one of our goals is to be able to compost approximately 75% of our trash. We're not quite there yet. We're getting closer, but this will certainly move us in a really positive direction. In transportation, on that in-service day as well, Terry Guzman spent time with the high school athletic directors and the principals going over the use of the athletic vans and all the requirements that go along with that. There are many things that the drivers have to go through in order to drive the van. So the ADs will be meeting with the coaches to go over that. Once these drivers have satisfied those requirements, then the vans will be deployed to these school sites and they can start to be used by our high schools. So we thank you for that. In food service, October is National Farm to School Month. Our NOSH program has had multiple barbecues planned for the month of October, serving local, hormone, and antibiotic-free beef burgers from Marin County. Rob would like one of those. Last week at one of these barbecues that was at Pueblo Vista, we obviously served a tremendous number of students at Pueblo Vista. We also hosted 118 parents at this one. That's pretty outstanding. There are 4 upcoming student tasting events scheduled at various elementary sites, and local growers have been invited to attend the event. The USDA will be visiting NVUSD and NOSH in the future. Visitors from the California Department of Education visited Snow Elementary School last Friday to observe the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program grant. And in case you're interested, I'm going to try to eat a meal tomorrow, which is green chili cheese tamale. And Thursday, Cindy, it's your favorite chicken Pizzoli. So be there, okay? I'll continue with the school planning and construction, the Measure H. So all of our projects are really moving in a really positive direction right now. They're moving, doing a really good job of making sure that they're being completed in a timely manner. We also recently completed a roofing assessment of all of our campuses. I shouldn't say all of our campuses, of most of our campuses that we know needed to be looked at. And so staff will now be prioritizing our school sites along with a tentative schedule on the roofs. And in case you are not aware, I think you all are, but we do have the grand opening of Irene M. Snow Elementary School on Monday, October 21st at 5:30 p.m. At Snow Elementary School, and we hope to see all of you. That concludes my report.
Approval of consent agenda. Consent agenda background information on these items is provided to the board prior to the meeting. A common motion takes action without discussion on a roll call vote unless the discussion of items is requested by board members.
So if the board will indulge me, I think we can take consent altogether, but I want to squeeze in a quick comment on I3A, which is to make sure everybody understands that naming facilities, which is mentioned in the letter of agreement with Napa Valley Ed Foundation and the Napa Valley Vintners, has an intersection with board policy 7310 on the naming of facilities. Now, there's a provision in the policy that says entities that make outstanding contributions, including financial contributions, so from a policy perspective, we're all set. It's just that we have a process for naming facilities, and the letter of agreement isn't the only thing that's going to drive that process. So with that, I'll move the consent agenda.
I'll second.
A first by Joe Shunk and a second by Mr. Gracia. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Isn't there a roll call for consent?
I'm sorry.
Trustee Water?
Aye.
Trustee Jankowicz? Aye. Trustee Gonzalez Mares?
Aye.
Trustee Martin?
Aye.
Trustee Shunk?
Aye.
Trustee Gracia?
Aye.
We jump to K, action items. K1, business and operations. K1A, contract for services with security consultant, Mr. Rocky Maderos.
So I had a quick comment on this one. The contract itself said that we were okay with his qualifications, but I didn't know what those were, and so I reached out and found out that he's actually very qualified and got a list of all of the things that he has done, from serving as the head of airport security to officers associations to any myriad of security-related matters. So I'm feeling much better about this item now, and so I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
First by Mr. Gracia, second by Ms. Gonzalez Mares. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
K2, human resources. Contract reopeners for 2019-2020 between Napa Valley Unified School District and California School Employees Association, CSEA.
Motion.
First by Mr. Gracia and a second by Ms. Waters. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Request to, K2B, request to hire teacher less than fully credentialed.
So moved.
First by Mr. Gracia, second by Mr. Shunk. All those in favor?
Aye.
K3, instructional services, agreement between Napa Valley Community College District, Talent Search, and Napa Valley Unified School District.
So moved.
I'll second, but I want to take a moment to ask a question that has kind of been bothering me with regard to some of these things. It's related to our TB policy and the testing that goes into the requirements that we have to satisfy when people are coming to work on our campuses, and how, when we have these agreements, if we're not specifying in them that we're requiring the TB testing or that the information be provided, we're getting those information. And that applies to actually several things on our agenda tonight, and is something that's been bothering me a bit for a while.
So where we don't generally specify an agreement, where we don't generally specify that somebody has to be TB tested by us, it's usually because it is an agreement with an accredited institution that requires that they be TB tested through that institution. For instance, when we have student teachers come as part of a requirement that they do their TB clearance. And this particular one from Napa Valley College is an employee of Napa Valley College who has that requirement. It's a contract we've done multiple years, so we know that they are requiring that, and so we're not specifying that in the actual agreement itself.
So how do we know, though, that it's actually been done? Like, do they provide us evidence that they have received the results?
Well, our assumption is because they're in the program or because they are in good standing as an employee that they've made that requirement happen. So like for our student teachers, they can't be in their program if they haven't provided proof that they have done the TB testing.
So we're not acquiring that information from these institutions?
We're not asking for the papers from the various institutions showing the TB requirement.
That might be something we want to look at.
So I will interject a point of procedure at this point and move that we extend the end time for the meeting to 11. I'm sure that will give us enough time to wrap it up and we won't need the entire half hour.
Everybody else agree?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Fair enough.
So I have a first by Ms. Gonzalez Mares and a second by Mr. Gracia.
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
K3B, Cerritos College and Vintage High School Agreement.
So moved.
First by Mr. Gracia,
Second.
second by Mr. Shunk. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
One comment that I think this is just so cool. For the record.
K3C, Memorandum of Understanding between Napa County Office of Education and Napa Valley Unified School District 2019-2020.
Quick question. Has any thought been given to expanding the schools served by safe routes to include the new Napa Junction, given we're still laying sidewalks and some other things that we'll need to sort of get the kids to fall into line there?
Thank you, trustee. We will bring that forward with the NCOE for next year.
I also had a question. I noted in this contract on page 11 that NCOE is going to provide us with 4 tobacco-related workshops on vaping at the middle and high schools. This seems like a really important issue since we have such a large vaping problem at the moment. And by my count, we have 10 middle and high schools, all of whom could really benefit from this assembly. Can we secure a full 10 presentations rather than just the 4 that are specified in this contract?
Absolutely. In fact, we've already done more than 4. So we've started to do vaping presentations in our secondary schools last spring. And so that's continuing throughout this year. And Mr. Mansway has a sign-up sheet. So every school will have options to get this. And they're being very well received at the sites.
Good. Motion?
With that, I'll move.
Second.
First by Mr. Gracia, second by Mr. Shunk. All those in favor? Aye. K3D, Cerritos College, a new technology high school agreement.
I'll move.
Second.
A first by Mr. Gracia, second by Mr. Shunk. All those in favor?
Aye.
And again, love this.
Yes, me too. K3E, Memorandum of Understanding between 10,000 Degrees and Napa Valley Unified School District, 2019-2020.
So I would like to ask if there's going to be reports in the future on how this program is successful or not, and I'd love to see an evaluation a year from now to see how things are going.
Yes, this is a privately funded organization, and they do a lot of annual reporting. So we will be able to bring some of that back.
With that, I'll move.
Second.
First by Mr. Gracia, second by Mr. Shunk. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. K3F, Memorandum of Understanding between NVUSD, NVAE, and California Department of Veterans Affairs for the Yountville Veterans Home CNA program.
So moved.
First by Mr. Gracia,
Second.
a second by Ms. Gonzalez Mares. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. K4, School Planning and Construction. K4A, SPC 29.990-17, change order number 2 to JL Modular, Inc. for the design build modular buildings at Snow Elementary School.
So moved.
First by Mr. Gracia,
Second.
second by Mr. Shunk. All those in favor?
Aye.
K4B, SPC 26.110-17, change order number 2 to JL Modular, Inc. for the design build modular buildings at River School.
So moved.
A first by Mr. Gracia,
Second.
second by Mr. Shunk. All those in favor?
Aye.
K4C, SPC 26.109-17, change order number 6 to BHM Construction, Inc. for the modernization and new construction at River School.
Just a quick comment. Are we almost done there? Okay.
Yeah, the first 90% done, and the second 90% is.
Seems like it's dragging, so, all right, I'll move.
First by Mr. Gracia, second by Ms. Waters. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. K4D, ratification of California Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Act, CUP-CCAA, listing.
So moved.
Second.
A first by Mr. Gracia and a second by Mr. Shunk. All those in favor?
Aye.
Informational. L1, business and operations. Do I have anything?
So I will just point out, 'cause I love my inter-district report. Since last year at this time, we have 80 more students coming to us from Vallejo City Unified, and 63 more since June. Since we don't hold school, that's really since August. And by the way, that's a 42% increase since June. So I had a quick discussion with Dr. Musetti about, because I worry a little bit about lack of organic growth in our own house, because inter-districts can be pulled at the discretion of the sending district. So it puts us a little bit at risk in our planning. The flip side is, I think we're going to run into far fewer objections than we would in the past about people wanting to come into the district. And as the report shows, it's a huge net influx into our district compared to students going elsewhere from the district. So I just wanted to point that out. And we haven't even branded and marketed ourselves yet, but there's been some very visible movement in perhaps our more entrepreneurial principals and schools.
Yes.
More to come around that.
Any other discussion? We're moving on to M, Board Representative Reports. On M1, I do have one public comment card for Jason Hutchings.
And he left a
Okay.
little while ago.
President Hurtado will be reporting on that upon his return.
City of Napa Liaison Representatives, M2, there's nothing to report. M3, City of American Canyon Liaison Representatives, we have nothing to report. M4, Town of Yountville Liaison Representative, nothing to report. N, additional suggestions and comments. I do have a comment. I've been rubbing my eyes all throughout the meeting. And there is a smell on this side of the room, and I'm not sure if it was a chemical product to clean the
Carpet?
I don't know what it was. But I've been crying the entire meeting, and I needed to be here. So I just want to make a recommendation of whatever it is making me cry completely throughout the meeting. So that's just my suggestion.
I just thought you were being empathetic.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Any other suggestions?
A motion to adjourn?
Okay. So first by Mr. Shunk and a second by Ms. Jankowicz. All those in favor?
Aye.
Close the meeting.